Let's find out if chat's working. Probably not. Holy crap! The chat is finally working. It's been like taking all freaking day. Well, sort of, Hylas, yes. So anyone ready for super big spoilers for Legion? Mega spoilers. Ultra spoilers. The biggest spoilers in the world. So, that was your verbal warning. We're also doing it right at the bat. This will only take me a minute. For those of you who don't want to hear Legion spoilers, it's your big chance to mute me! Okay, in Legion, we have to go after these items called the Pillars of Creation. As we go after the Pillars of Creation... It seems to be a little bit quieter. There we go. As we go after these Pillars of Creation, there's stuff we need for stuff that doesn't matter. I'm not going to spoil any of that. What's really important is the names of them. The Aegis of Agrimar, the Tidestone of Golganath, the Eye of Amanthul, the Hammer of Khazgaroth. You kind of notice a trend here. They're each named after a Titan, except for the last one, which is called the Tears of Elune. Huh. Anyways. Moving on. Chapter 4. The New World. Let's see, do I have that picture up? Looks like I don't. Hello, Nothrazim. Welcome to your doom. I thought I had a third picture up here. Hang on just a second. I guess I decided not to. Well, whatever. We're still not sure, Lilu. It didn't actually say definitively. But at this point, I would put like a 90 percentile chance on that. Yeah, when they're all out, Maxsmith, in like a year or two. A New World, Chapter 4. The Sundering had left the world broken. The Well of Eternity was gone, and so too was the once coveted source of the Night Elves' arcane power. Desperate for refuge, the surviving Night Elves fled northwest to Mount Hyjal, one of the few places on Azeroth untouched by destruction. En route to Hyjal, Malfurion, Stormrage, and the other Night Elves concluded that arcane magic was simply not safe. They agreed to prohibit its use to avoid another catastrophe like the War of the Ancients. Oh my god, Schmeidolf! Gnarlex, we've already talked about the Titans, unless there's like... about the Tarn, unless there's another thing. No, I mean all of them, Maxsmith, as in every DLC that ever comes out ever for Fallout 4. You can't tell me that the one story DLC is the only one they're ever coming out with. Anyways... As they reached the summit of Hyjal, they were horrified to discover a second, smaller Well of Eternity. Equally shocking was the figure whom the Night Elves found standing at the fount's shores. Illidan. Before the Sundering, Illidan had filled several vials with enchanted liquid from the original Well of Eternity. He had poured some of them into the lake atop of Mount Hyjal, transforming the idyllic waters into a fount of arcane power. Violence erupted when a group of Night Elves confronted Illidan, and his brother Malfurion was forced to restrain him. Yet Illidan insisted the new Well of Eternity was necessary. With it, the Night Elves would have the arcane power needed to fight off the Burning Legion when, not if, when they returned. Though some of the surviving Highborn agreed with Illidan, the majority did not. They chastised him for his brash and selfish act, claiming a new Well of Eternity would be used as a gateway for the Legion. Even then, Illidan remained unapologetic. Seeing no other recourse, the Night Elves decided to deal with Illidan once and for all. Okay, Maxsmith, let me make this clear. There are 3 DLCs coming out. One of them has story components in it. In other words, there's only one DLC coming out that I give a damn about. So again, when all of the DLCs are out for Fallout 4, that is when I will start paying attention to it. Ultimately, the decision was made to imprison the sorcerer. This music does not fit this scene. Malfurion himself would see to enacting this punishment. With the help of Cenarius, he chained Illidan deep within a barrow prison. Malfurion then charged the priestess, Maya of Shadowsong, to stand guard over the wayward sorcerer. She would later take on the mantle of Warden, founding a secret and order of elite Night Elf jailers. Upon learning of the Second Well, 3 of the great dragon aspects converged on Hyjal. Like the Night Elves, they knew that for so long as the Fount of Power existed, the Legion would have a means to invade Azeroth once again. Thus, the aspect of life, Alexstrasza, used an enchanted seed to sprout a mighty tree over the Well of Eternity. The tree's boughs soon towered over the lake, scraping the belly of the heavens. Its roots grew deep into the earth, spreading life-giving energies across the war-torn world. Hereafter, the great tree would act as a seal over the Well of Eternity, preventing the Legion, or anyone else, from abusing its power. Malfurion and the other elves looked upon this colossal world tree and named it Nordrassil, the crown of the heavens. They vowed to keep it safe and protect the Well of Eternity at any cost. To honor this decision, the dragon aspects agreed to bless the Night Elves so they could perform their guardianship successfully. Alexstrasza infused Nordrassil with renewed strength and vitality, which would also extend to the Night Elves. The aspect of dreams, Izera, then blessed the tree, binding it and all Night Elf druids to the Emerald Dream. Prior to this, Malfurion and his followers had wandered the realm, but doing so required difficult meditation. This new enchantment placed on Nordrassil will allow these druids to journey into the dream whenever they wished. Lastly, Nosdormu, aspect of time, wove his energies through the boughs and roots of Nordrassil, assuring them that as long as the tree stood, they would possess immortality. I've actually already talked about how stupid this is back during our Night Elf thing. I'd just like to reiterate that it's stupid. Moving on. With that, the aspects ventured back to their hidden lairs. Due to their enchantments, the Second Well of Eternity would no longer act as a beacon for demons, nor could the Legion easily use it as a gateway into Azeroth. It would become a symbol of the Night Elves' connection to the natural world, a sacred monument that empowered the race with immunity to disease, aging, and sickness. As centuries passed, the burgeoning Night Elf society expanded into the dense forests of Ashenvale, south of Mount Hyjal. Tyrande Whisperwind, High Priestess of the Sisterhood of Elune, led the Night Elves in rebuilding their society. Her order was uniquely positioned to fill the power vacuum among the Night Elves, for it emerged from the War of the Ancients relatively unscathed. Tyrande deftly positioned the Sisterhood as leaders of government and military, and she forged a new fighting force, the Sentinels. Composed of devout, highly trained warrior women, this order dedicated itself towards protecting the emergent Night Elf society. No, I am not Maximus. The Sentinels set out to patrol their misty forest home, befriending the native creatures of the land and standing guard against any threat. Meanwhile, Malfurion continued fostering a culture of druidism among his people. Having abandoned arcane magic, many former sorcerers embraced Malfurion's teachings and devoted themselves to living in harmony with nature. These early druids lacked the stringent military discipline and code of the Sentinels. Malfurion's followers were free to explore the depths of the dream at will. They also experimented in the art of shapeshifting, taking the form of bears, night sabers, crows, and other animals that roamed the woodland deeps. The druids regularly entered long periods of hibernation as they journeyed into the dream. This aloofness frustrated Tyrande and her sentinels. Although they often sought the druids' help to safeguard the land, few of Malfurion's followers were ever awake to answer the call. As these changes in society took shape, an old foe was gathering strength in Kalimdor. Following the War of the Ancients, the remaining satyrs had stayed hidden in the dark corners of the world, waiting to strike back at the Night Elves. Eventually, one of the horned aberrations, Zalin the Feared, gave his brethren the chance. He rallied the satyrs and girded them for war. Zalin's rise also drew the attention of the Burning Legion remnants trapped on Azeroth after the Sundering. Doom Guards and other wicked beings emerged from dark warrens, drawn to the satyrs' call. As one, this demonic army launched its brutal assault on the Night Elf stronghold of Night's Run, plunging the fragile society into war once again. Quick aside. The Sentinels include quite a number of Night Elves who had fought bravely during the War of the Ancients. Chief amongst them was Chandris Feathermood. Orphaned during the Legion's invasion, she was taken under Tyranda's care. Young Chandris distinguished herself in combat time and time again through conflict. Her heroics earned her a place at Tyranda's side thereafter, and when the Sentinels were forged, she was named the captain of the fledgling order. Initially, the Night Elves suffered terrible losses from the Satyrs' assaults. Yet the tides of battle soon changed when Tyranda's adopted daughter, captain of the Sentinels, Chandris Feathermoon, proposed a new strategy to fight the demons. She suggested that the Druids be called from their sojourn in the dream so they could be used as a fighting force. Upon seeing how Zalin had corrupted the Night Elves' forests, Malfurion agreed to Chandris' request, and summoned the most powerful Druids of Kalimdor to his side. As one, the Druids and Sentinels struck into the heart of Satyr territory. Chandris' brilliant guerrilla maneuvers led the Night Elves to overcome many of their enemies, including Zalin himself. But while the Night Elves made gains in the war, a new threat emerged from within their ranks. A group of wayward Druids were seeking to harness the fury of the wild god Goldrin. And they wanted to adopt these new, wild, savage forms. Led by Relar Fangfire, these Druids became known as Worgen. Relar and his ferocious companions were slaves to their own rage, and they tore through friend and foe alike. Yeah, that's acceptable. Night Elves bitten by the wolf beast contracted a virulent curse that transformed them into Worgen as well. The Worgen catastrophe forced Malfurion to reflect on the state of Druidism. Without regulation, he concluded that individuals like Relar would inevitably go too far in their application of Druidic power. Malfurion and his followers would therefore craft the Cenarian Circle, a harmonious order that would guide and keep watch over the world's Druids and their practices. The Cenarian Circle's first great task was to deal with the Worgen threat. Seeing no other recourse, Malfurion banished Relar and his Worgen to the Emerald Dream. Malfurion really likes banishing people, doesn't he? There, Malfurion believed they would enter a peaceful, eternal slumber between the enchanted tree known as Daralnir. After the Worgen's banishment, any hope the Satyrs had of victory was lost. The Night Elves cut deep into the enemy's domain until most of the forest had been cleansed of corruption. The remaining few Satyrs retreated into shadows. Never again would they pose such a significant threat to Night Elf society. Here, I'm going to switch playlists real quick here. In the centuries after the Sundering, the surviving Highborn attempted to assimilate into the new Night Elf society, but most of them struggled to do so. They found the temptation to delve into arcane magic irresistible, despite the strict laws banning sorcery. Over time, these Highborn were warned again and again to stop meddling with otherworldly powers. The penalty for repeat offenders was death. But despite this extreme punishment, they could not stop. The call of arcane energy was simply too strong to ignore. A revered Highborn elf, Dathramar Sunstrider, chafed at the restrictions and punishment that weighed on his mind. He eventually proclaimed that arcane power was the birthright of the Highborn, and any who feared it was a coward. He and his followers began to practice arcane arts without fear or restraint, daring the Night Elves to attack. For Dathramar and the other Highborn, using magic was more than just an act of rebellion. They had always believed the Night Elves were destined for greatness. Though these did not wholly condone the evils of Ashara, they knew in their bones that Night Elf society could once again flourish into a mighty empire. But to do so, they would need to study and use the magic of arcane power. The Highborn's reckless defiance was as sudden as it was startling. In the end, the other Night Elves could not bring themselves to sentence so many of their brothers and sisters to death. Instead, they barred the Highborn from ever setting foot on Hyjal again. Dathramar and his followers were exiled, cut off from the wells of Eternity's energies. Most of the Highborn happily accepted their banishment. They were finally free of the constraints of the other Night Elves. Under Dathramar's guidance, the Highborn built a fleet of mighty ships. I wonder if they're retconning the Ashenvale situation. It sounds like they are. Then they set sail, leaving Kalimdor for whatever lands might lie beyond the churning maelstrom. The Highborn's determination was eventually rewarded when they made landfall on a new continent years later. This region, filled with lush wildlife and woodlands, would later become known as the Eastern Kingdoms. The Highborn traveled on foot for months, before finally settling on a place marked by a massive, strange silver hand, a land called Tirsifal, by tribes of primitive humans that inhabited the area. Initially, these humans rarely interacted with the Highborn, but as time passed, they began to tell legends of the brave, metal-skinned guardian Tyr who had sacrificed himself to kill a monstrous foe in Tirsifal. Indeed, the Highborn detected powerful latent ley energies of the land, energies that primitive humans could not detect. It was no well of eternity, but the lingering supernatural presence intrigued the experienced arcane practitioners. Some elves speculated that, in time, they could unlock its secrets and restore themselves to their former glory. The Ashenvale thing was in the original canon, which this, I note, has not mentioned at all. The High Elves, in a show of defiance, unleashed a storm over Ashenvale that killed a lot of people, and then they were banished. They were desperate to succeed quickly. After being exiled from the Well of Eternity, the Highborn began to feel the effects of aging and disease. Their skin lost its violet hue, and they began to shrink in stature. The Highborn feared these effects would worsen over time. Led by Dathramar, the Highborn made a new life in Tirsifal, and yet for a time they dwelled in peace and reveled in their independence. No, not very big retcon, no. It's actually a retcon that makes sense to me, too. The random Ashenvale storm thing always just kind of stuck out for me as something that's off. It's like, all of a sudden, we're peaceful, kill everyone here! Okay, we're back to being peaceful. It was just a weird thing. Anyways, for a time they dwelled in peace and reveled in their independence in the Tirsifal Glades. Yet as they tapped into the area's latent magic, they found shades of dark energy. These shadowy power drove some of the Highborn to madness. They began to argue the humans had built their settlements atop the most potent ley lines in the region. Therefore, the Highborn should force them to relocate or conquer the primitives. Dathramar did not agree. He had no wish to war against a people who posed no threat to his kind. The wise leader had also sensed the dark energies radiating from the area. He theorized they were responsible for the sudden rise of belligerence and madness. Ultimately, Dathramar led his people away from Tirsifal to avert violence and spare them from further calamity. He decided they would try to make a new home in the north. There, Dathramar's scouts discovered a region rife with lush forests and powerful ley energies. Intent on reaching this land, the beleaguered, God, that's such a weird word, Highborn struck out to the north and into the unknown. No, Macsmith, it's a fairly common concept. Dathramar, also they were completely different in Primus. Dathramar Sunstrider hailed from a long line of illustrious Highborn, all of whom have served the Night Elf throne. Their namesake was something of an oddity of the moon-worshipping race. Dathramar's ancestor had chosen Sunstrider to symbolize their penchant for delving into the unknown, for breaking expectations, for throwing caution to the wind in search of greatness. Like his bold progenitors, Dathramar carried on this tradition with pride. The exile of the Highborn ended a tenuous chapter in Night Elf history. Even so, Tyrande and Malfurion found no time to rest. Malfurion and the Cenarian Circle busied themselves with upholding the balance of nature and healing lands still polluted with demonic and corruption. Much of this they did in unison with Ysera and her green dragonflight, deep within the twisting pathways of the Emerald Dream. Malfurion and the other druids slumbered for decades at a time, their dream forms wandering Ysera's realm. Tyrande, Chandris, and the Sentinels maintained their guardianship over the Night Elf domain. They patrolled the forests without rest, ever wary of another demonic resurgence. Their efforts resulted in a long-sought period of peace and tranquility. Life in the forests and thickets of Hyjal thrived. In time, the enchanted keepers of the grove and woodland dryads emerged from the secluded moonglade. The Night Elves revered these creatures, for they were Cenarius' own sons and daughters. Their presence in the wilds of Ashenvale was seen as an omen of better times to come. Along with the keepers of the groves and the dryads, other creatures appeared in the open with greater frequency. The wise treants, the elusive fairy dragons, the mythical chimeras, all began roaming near the forests of the Night Elves' holdings. In the centuries to come, the Night Elves would foster strong relations with all these fey creatures. With Maltherian in the dream, the task of governing the daily activities of the Night Elves fell to Tyrande. The mantle of leadership was demanding, but she enjoyed it. She liked going to war constantly about everything. Yet despite the hope and optimism that blossomed amongst the Night Elves, Tyrande could not shake the feeling that dire times were ahead. They had banished the Burning Legion, but they did not kill Sargeras. Tyrande believed with all her heart that the fallen Titan was somewhere out in the darkness between the stars, plotting another attack. Maybe it was just another matter of time before he renewed his burning crusade. Quick thing I want to share here. Yeah, no kidding, Hylisk. Actually, Jay, I could tell you the origin of the Blood Elves right now. I'd say unless they change it in this book, but that's not how that's going to work because this book doesn't go far enough to cover that. Okay, I should have another image here. I specifically went out of my way to grab this one. Hang on. One moment. You know what? Sure. Why did it not save the picture? Give me a second. Why is this not saving? There, yes, that's the picture. Save the picture. Oh, that's why. Why did it... Found it. So I want to show you this. You see this? Wow, that's actually a lot smaller than I wanted it to be. There we go. Okay, so this is the planet that contained that corrupted Nascent Titan that Sargeras was slicing in two. You can literally see the planet being sliced in two here, right? Well, I'm really showing you this to really get across an idea here. You see that creature in the lower left? That's Sargeras. I'm doing this to really emphasize something. That's his weapon, by the way, that he just sliced a planet in half with. That's a planet, and that's a Titan. Do you see the comparison of the two's size? So in case you thought I was being facetious when I said that Titans are planets, here you go. This is also probably why the Titans didn't want to directly intervene with Azeroth, because holy crap. This is also probably why ripping Y'Shaarj out of the planet was such a big deal. I mean, literally, look at that. And again, yes, this was not corruption. There was no demonic essence. There was no void power forcing him to do this. This was him logically coming to this conclusion. Which I like that idea a lot, by the way. So, yeah, that's Sargeras. In case you've ever, yeah. So, no, he is normally that big. All the Titans are normally that big. They mention that in the book. Far from the dense woodlands of Ashenvale, Dathramar Sunstrider and the Highborn continued their quest to find a home in the Eastern Kingdoms. They followed the trails of magical essence, seeking the confluence of ley lines that their scouts had spied in the north. The Highborn's journey proved unexpectedly brutal. A ferocious blizzard stopped the elves dead in their tracks for nearly a month, and as they traveled with no way to move but forward or escape from the high mountain passes. The Highborn quickly realized how vulnerable they had become without the Well of Eternity. For the first time in memory, they began to die of starvation. Only the compassion of the humans living in the mountains kept the entire expedition from perishing in the winter fury. Once the storm lifted, the Highborn forged ahead, shaken but determined to find their new home. As they drew closer to the land that the scouts found, hope warmed their weary hearts. Verdant woodlands blanketed the terrain, and the ground beneath the Highborn's fleet crackled with potent lines of magic. But they soon discovered another race also called this region home: the Amani trolls. Yeah, we're screwed, Hylisk, if that ever happens. Remember, one of the things the Titans were actively doing was encouraging sentient life to grow on the birthing Titan planets, because that helped the Titan grow and nurture and become a sentient being. The implication, but not outright statement, is that the Titan is the culmination of all the life on the planet it was. So we would all become part of the Great Confluence, and all die in the process. Anywho. The Amani. The arrival of the Highborn infuriated the trolls, who harbored bitter hatred of the elves from the days of Queen Ashara. The Amani set out raiding parties immediately, and the Highborn soon learned to fear troll ambushes in the dense forests. But the elves stubbornly pressed forward, using their magical prowess to decimate any Amani who dared cross their path. Soon the trolls also learned to tread cautiously. The continuous skirmishes fostered a mutual enmity between the Amani and the Highborn. Despite the trolls' ferocity, the elves finally reached the nexus of ley lines they had been seeking. Powerful torrents of arcane energy converged in the vibrant forests. Dathramar proclaimed this was where they would begin their civilization anew. No, the Amani were just here anyways, Nerazaz. This was actually Amani territory, and had been for a long time. Before the eyes of his followers, Dathramar revealed something he had kept hidden over the long and torturous journey to the north. A vial, filled with enchanted waters from the original Well of Eternity. Just before the Highborn had been exiled, Dathramar had taken it from Illidan's remaining vials from the custody of the Night Elves. So Illidan didn't give it to him, he stole it from Illidan. Dathramar poured the vial into a small lake at the center of the Nexus, and a brilliant font of energy tore through the skies of Azeroth. The Highborn dubbed this glorious cradle of power the Sunwell, a name chosen in honor of Dathramar and his bold quest to reignite their culture. Shortly thereafter, the Highborn abandoned their traditional following of the moon, taking instead their strength of the sun. In time, they would even be known by a new name, High Elves. The amount of arcane power available to the elves increased by an astonishing degree. Many of them proclaimed Dathramar had brought them salvation. They called their new land Quel'Thalas, the High Home, and declared it would dwarf the Night Elf civilization and stand as a monument for the ages. The trolls did not agree. The High Elves had built their kingdom atop ancient Amani ruins still considered hallowed ground by the trolls. Outnumbering the elves by over 10 to 1, the Amani struggled ferociously to drive the invaders from their sacred land. The High Elves drew on the full might of their newfound power, barely holding off the trolls' assaults. Dathramar himself led almost every single battle against the Amani, and bit by bit the elves carved out the borders of their kingdom, securing a new home paid for in the blood of their brothers and sisters. Yet the elves grew wary of their rampant use of arcane magic. Fearing it would draw the Burning Legion to Azeroth once again, Dathramar sent his most powerful arcanists to devise a solution. Over the decades, they built a series of monolithic runestones around the Quel'Thalas border. This border, the Bandonoriel, or Gatekeeper, in High Elven, would prevent others from detecting the elves' usage of arcane magic, and frighten away the superstitious Amani. The trolls eventually retreated back to the temple city of Zul'Aman. They decided it was safer to ambush elven convoys that strayed beyond the barrier than to launch a full-scale assault. An elite group of High Elf Rangers soon arose to combat this threat. Inside the borders of Quel'Thalas, civilization thrived. No longer fearful of using magic, the High Elves created marvelous works and bathed their land in eternal spring. Never again would they experience another winter as brutal as the one they suffered en route to this capital. Their capital, Silvermoon, became a shining monument to the memory of the elves' ancient empire. With this new empire established, Dathramar stepped down as leader. His bloodline would go on to inherit his kingdom of peace and prosperity, but this would come to an end when Dathramar's great-grandson Anasterion donned the mantle of leadership. But we'll get to that in a moment. As Quel'Thalas flourished, other highborn communities across the world struggled to survive. One such community was the city of Chandralar, a repository of arcane relics and artifacts. At the apex of the Night Elf Empire, this outpost had been established in the northern reaches of Kalimdor. Following the sundering, the Azeroth's main continent had fractured into multiple landmasses. Now Chandralar and its highborn dwelled in the frigid heart of a new and harsh continent called Northrend. The Chandralar kingdom, highborn, remained in total isolation, cut off from their cousins in Kalimdor and the eastern kingdoms. Their distance from the second well of eternity left them vulnerable to disease and other ailments. Okay, I think we're going to make that official. I'm going to go ahead and call myself wrong on something. I mentioned this was speculative. But you remember how I mentioned how... So we were discussing the range at which you could be connected to the well, and I was speculating, based on evidence, which I cited, that the range was basically limitless. Well, I was wrong. This is the third time now they've mentioned that actual physical distance to the Well of Eternity, or the Sunwell, actually reduces its effect on you. So we're going to go ahead and call that an error on my part. And on the part of the evidence I was using. Anywho, distance from the second Well of Eternity left them vulnerable to disease and other ailments. Unlike Duthramar's followers, the Chandral Highborn did not possess any vials of the Well of Eternity's waters. They had no way to create a surrogate source of power. For centuries, the Highborn scoured the surrounding forests of Moonsong for a means to sustain themselves. Yes, it does, Jay. Technically. Very technically. Apparently, yes, Magister. Shrug. Yeah, what? Okay. During this time, the Highborn witnessed members of the Blue Dragonflight using spells to crystallize living things and draw power from them. Although the dragons performed these acts out of curiosity, the elves saw the technique as a mean to end their suffering forever. Attempts by the Highborn to interact with the dragons were ignored, or, in some cases, met with open hostility. Out of desperation, a group of Highborn sorcerers infiltrated the Blue Flight's wondrous lair, the Nexus. The Highborn succeeded in learning of the dragon's techniques, but greed drove them to take more than what they had come for. The elves pilfered some of the powerful relics stored in the Nexus. In doing so, they triggered magical wards, sending the blue dragons into a frenzy. Although the Highborn thieves escaped with their lives, they knew full well the dragons would seek retribution. That day soon arrived. Dozens of blue dragons descended on Chandralar, seething with indignation at the theft of their precious relics by the lesser elves. The elven sorcerers, desperate to drive away their enemies, gathered on an icy cliff overlooking Moonsong. There they agreed to use the techniques they had acquired from the Nexus. As one, the Highborn sorcerers focused their power, hoping to crystallize a portion of the forest and use its energies as a weapon to annihilate the dragons. This proved disastrous. The Highborn's reckless casting set off a blinding explosion as visible as far away as Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms. The roaring torrent of energy instantly crystallized the entire forest of Moonsong. The blue dragons, sensing the impending spellwork, escaped before the disaster struck. The physical forms of every other living creature in the region was shattered by the release of the energy, and their spirits, although warped by the powerful spell, were left intact, cursed to mindlessly wander the haunted land that would become known as the Crystal Song Forest. So, that's the zone that we were supposed to be questing at, just around Dalaran in Northrend. The very, 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 very pretty crystallized forest. Probably Bragwin, to both questions. Meanwhile, when the sundering tore through Azeroth, the tectonic devastation rattled the captive old gods and weakened their keeper-wrought prisons. The apocalyptic event also stirred the malign entities to new degrees of deadly awareness. Over the millennia that followed, great tendrils of corruption spilled from the old gods' damaged prisons and eventually seeped to the world's surface. Northrend, where Yogg-Saron was imprisoned, saw some of the most severe effects. Festering blooms of a new mineral, serenite, spread throughout the crust of the land and sapped the life of native flora and fauna. Upon discovering serenite, a small group of druids with the Cenarian Circle decided to eradicate it. The reasoning they reasoned that if the life-giving energies of the World Tree... Oh my gosh, we're about to finally answer a question, guys. They reasoned that if the life-giving energies of the World Tree could heal the lands around Mount Hyjal, the same could do another great tree could do the same in Northrend. The group's leader, Fandral Staghelm, soon became obsessed with the idea. No, he did not, Thrace. Some druids advised him to seek the guidance of the aspects. Their knowledge and blessings had allowed Nordrassil to flourish, and without them, planting another tree could have unforeseen consequences. Yet Staghelm believed there was no time to wait. Serenite was spreading unchecked throughout Northrend, and even other parts of the world. Rather than waste time in endless debates, Staghelm moved to act, without consulting the aspects or the circle. Fandral Staghelm and his closest survivor secretly cut 6 enchanted branches from the boughs of Nordrassil. With the branches in hand, they traveled the world to locations where serenite blooms had sprung to life. One by one, they planted the branches in these regions, hoping to thwart the corruption. The areas they left his mark include, pay attention now, Ashenvale, Feralas, the Crystal Song Forest, two places that would eventually be known as Duskwood and the Hinterlands. I hope that means something to a lot of you who've been playing this game before. The branches quickly took root and became new trees. Together, they acted like conduits, channeling the powers of the dream into the waking world, strengthening the nearby wildlife, scouring the serenite deposits. Heartened by their success, the druids planted the last of the branches in the mountains of Northrend over the largest growth of the serenite. This world tree was called Andrasil, Crown of Snow, and it grew with astonishing speed, and the benefits were almost immediate. The spread of serenite ceased, wildlife flourished anew. Malfurion and the rest of the circle became furious upon learning these branches had been planted without their approval. They did, however, agree that the plan seemed to have worked. For several decades, Andrasil towered over Northrend, and all seemed well. Yet in time, circumstances changed. Bloody battles erupted between Tonka and the forest nymphs, two races not known for their warring ways. The fighting was sudden and shockingly vicious, filled with barbarism and vile acts. Words slowly reached the druids of this, and the Cenarian Circle launched an expedition to investigate the source of the violence. What the druids found chilled them to their bone. Andrasil's roots had reached so deep that they actually touched Yogg-Saron's prison. The old god had then infused the tree with his foul energies directly, thus giving all the living creatures in the area the drive to madness. The Cenarian Circle knew that without the blessing of the aspects, Andrasil was vulnerable to this corruption. They were also aware there was no way to spare the tree or ease its suffering. And so the Cenarian Circle decided they must destroy Andrasil. With heavy hearts they felled the great tree, slamming it down to the icy surface of Northrend with a deafening boom that echoed even through the ethereal forests of the Emerald Dream. Yeah, no kidding, Hylisk. Forever after, the druids would refer to the fallen tree as Vordrasil, the Broken Crown. That's the one in Grizzly Hills, if you can't recall. Although killing Andrasil had been a heartbreaking task, the Cenarian Circle was pleased it had stopped the growth of serenite. And yet, unbeknownst to the druids, something dark had taken root in the Emerald Dream. Yogg-Saron had used the trees planted by Fandral as a doorway into the dream, through which the other old gods could grasp at the ethereal domain as well. Small little seeds of corruption were spread throughout Ysera's realm. In time, these seeds polluted the dream rays. This is the beginning of what would eventually become known as the Emerald Nightmare. The year -3000, the Exodus of the Gnomes. As wars raged and new civilizations arose and fell on the surface of Azeroth, the Earthen largely kept to themselves. They were unconcerned with the activities of the world's other races. Some Earthen remained isolated underneath the icy mountains of Northrend. Others, who came to the south with Arcades and Ironia, slumbered within the catacomb vaults of Uldaman. Only a very small number of these Earthen had chosen not to be placed in stasis, deciding they would watch over the facility along with their mechanome companions. During this period, Arcades and Ironia became distant from their servants. They became ever more obsessed with a way to cure the curse of flesh. Funny that the Mogu figured that out. Arcades and Ironia often retreat to the lotus chambers of Uldaman, spending years in contemplation. Eventually, the two colossal Titan-forged would disappear from sight and settle into a long period of hibernation. Centuries passed without word from either of them, and the Mechanomes and the Earthen were left to manage Uldaman on their own. When the sundering tore through Azeroth, many of the active Earthen reeled from the catastrophe. They felt the pain of the broken world as if it was their own. They tunneled deep within Uldaman and locked themselves away in the hibernation chambers alongside their sleeping brethren. Only the Mechanomes now remained to watch over them as facility. They, too, eventually succumbed to the curse of flesh. This affliction caused many of them to degenerate into beings later known simply as gnomes. Physically and mentally debilitated, the creatures lost all sense of purpose and abandoned the halls of Uldaman. They fled into the surrounding mountain peaks and caverns. Only a handful of Mechanomes stayed in the facility, driven by their Titan-forged imperative. The first generation of gnomes carved out an existence in the snowy mountain to the west of Uldaman. Lacking strength or defenses, the frail gnomes struggled to survive the harsh elements, the barbaric ice trolls, and the other threats that roamed the land. They did retain their natural intellect and a sense of ingenuity. As generations passed, the gnomes dedicated themselves to technological advancement and discovery. These would be their only means of sustaining themselves in the new world. To this end, the gnomes eschewed record-keeping and oral storytelling, considering them immaterial to survival. I mentioned this, actually, not too long ago. In only a few short generations, the gnomes lost all knowledge of their Titan-forged heritage. What they gained, however, was a new society. Their ingenious engineering and sciences had helped them overcome hardship after hardship. The gnomes carved out a series of highly fortified dwellings, deep within the cold mountains of what would later be known as Dun Morog. This is something I actually hinted at. Remember how I mentioned how the Tauren weren't that advanced because they didn't need to be? The gnomes were very advanced because they needed to be. It's a very logical form of natural selection going on there. The year -2800. The rise of Erethdor. Over thousands of years, humanity had flourished in the Eastern Kingdom. The young race, of course, originated from the group of Vrykul who had settled in the Tirsifal Glades. Although humans were diminished in size and strength, they possessed incredible willpower and survival instincts. Groups of hunter-gatherer humans proliferated throughout the forests and hillocks of the continent. As their society continued to evolve and advance, humans gathered in an array of different tribes. Each one practiced different beliefs, crude forms of druidism and elemental shamanism. Despite the existence of the Amani and the High Elves and other threats, humanity's greatest adversary proved itself. What a shock. The early tribes constantly warred with each other for other land and, by extension, power. One tribe, the tribe of Arathi, came to realize the error of their ways. Over the span of a few decades, troll incursions into human territories had become more pronounced and ruthless. Something was changing among the brutish Amani to the north. The Arathi knew that if humankind remained divided, it would stand little chance against a true war with its moss-skinned foes. Led by warlord Thoradin, the tribe embarked on a campaign to bring its rivals under a single banner by force or diplomacy. The Arathi lived on the northeastern border of human lands, had a long history of skirmishes with the trolls. Hang on, is this? Yes. Actually, this is a good time to bring up a picture that I already have for you guys. That would be This one? Hang on. One moment. No? Did I not save? Oh my god, why is this doing this? One moment. I know I got this picture. Like, I just grabbed this damn thing. What you're gonna do? Yes. Okay. Stupid frickin' thing. There we go. Okay, so, despite this saying the Troll Wars here, what I really want to show you is this area right here. So, the Arathi lived in the northeastern borders of the human lands, had a long history of skirmishes with the trolls. The experience had honed Thoradin into a master tactician and strategist. In the span of just 6 weeks, the warlord brought the other tribes to heels. He won a few of his adversaries to his side through political marriages. In other cases, he pitted his rivals against each other. On rare occasions, the Kenny warlord was forced to outright conquer some of the more belligerent tribes. Much to the surprise of those he defeated, Thoradin did not reign as a tyrant. He offered his former enemies peace and equality in what he claimed would be a new human nation, a kingdom, a united kingdom of unlimited potential. The tribal leaders would not fade into obscurity. They would serve as generals. With these acts, Thoradin won the loyalty of his adversaries and was crowned king. King Thoradin named his new kingdom Arathor. He tasked his most gifted builders with the construction of a mighty capital called Strom, southeast of the Tirsifal Glades. The semi-arid terrain around the city acted as an ideal buffer zone between humanity and the Yamani, prohibiting the trolls from launching their much-feared forest ambushes. Thoradin also ordered his people to build a great wall near the capital to further shield them from Amani incursions. Word of Strom's might quickly spread to the disparate tribes across the continent. Many flocked to the fortress for safety. Just as Thoradin had expected, the Yamani trolls soon began encroaching on the outlying lands controlled by the humans. The king dispatched 2 of his most prominent generals to gather intelligence on the enemies and waylay any of the brutes who strayed too deep into Arathor's borders. One of the generals was named Ignatius. He and his people originally dwelled in the rugged slopes around the Altaric Mountains. Though considered uncouth and savage by many of the other humans in the area, Igneus and his Northlanders were unmatched in their bravery and strength. They stalked well beyond Arathor's borders, slaughtering any trolls they found in the woodlands. Igneus would garner the name Trollbane for the amount of Amani blood he spilled. Thoradin's other favored general was Lordain, who hailed from the heart of the Tirsifal Glades. He and his regimented warriors were considered more refined than Igneus and the other mountain folk. Knightly in appearance and mindset, Lordain's forces thoroughly patrolled the edges of Arathor's northern borders. On the rare occasion that Amani raiding parties approached the kingdom, Lordain put them to the blade. Both Lordain and Igneus often returned to Strom with tales of horrific conflict brewing between the Amani and the High Elves to the far north. There were also whispers of something else stirring in the forests, tales of voodoo and supernatural beings prowling the wilds in the dead of night. Though the reports unsettled them, Thoradin and his generals agreed they would not risk their own kind or send any aid to the elves. For the time being, they kept the bulk of their forces behind Strom's massive ramparts, confident that they could withstand any foe. Side note, the legend of the Silver Hand, which is up here, of course. No one knows what became of Tyr's fabled Silver Hand, left behind in ages past at the heart of the Tirsifal Glades. The Silver Hand was a common symbol for the human tribes in the region, It appeared on clothing, pendants, worn to ward off evil spirits, protect warriors in battle, cure diseases. Many, many centuries later, it would come to represent the greatest order of paladins, the light-wielding warriors who placed self-sacrifice above all else. The Troll Wars, Part 1. The Siege of Quel'Thalas. Millennia after being defeated by the High Elves, the Amani trolls plotted within their temple city of Zulamon. Yet though they were fierce warriors, the trolls lacked a strong leader who could bring them victory. Infighting was also spreading throughout the tribe, threatening to destroy it from within. The Amani's fortunes changed when they received aid from the revered Zandalari. The Zandalari saw themselves as protectors, spiritual leaders of all trolls. They were eager to strengthen troll societies across all of Azeroth, many of which had languished since the time of the Great Sundering. Even the Zandalari had suffered from that cataclysmic event. Their once glorious mountain home of Zandalar had been swallowed by the sea, leaving nothing more than a small island behind. In the Amani, the Zandalari saw an opportunity to revitalize the race's most powerful tribes and reassert troll dominance of the eastern kingdoms. Overwhelming the High Elves would prove to be no easy task, but the Zandalari were confident of victory. Quel'Thalas was not as powerful as the ancient Night Elf Empire that had decimated the trolls so long ago. In addition, the Zandalari had honed and perfected their own voodoo arts over the millennia. A handful of wise Zandalari emissaries made the journey from their island home to Zulamon. There they promised to help the Amani plan for their impending conflict. More importantly, the Zandalari would ensure the mighty Loa would aid the trolls in battle. To settle matters of leadership, the Zandalari also made one of Amani's most fearless warriors, Jintha, ruler of his people. Small Amani warbands began emerging from the forest and attacking Quel'Thalas's borders, testing the High Elves' strength. Always the cunning trolls hid their true numbers and capabilities. After a series of successful skirmishes, the Amani decided the time for all-out war had finally come. Without warning, tens of thousands of troll fighters exploded from the shadowy forests. Monstrous Loa marched alongside the Amani, infusing their troll adherents with supernatural might. The High Elves struggled desperately to hold back their foes, but they were forced to give ground. With astonishing speed and ferocity, the Amani laid waste to the outer reaches of Quel'Thalas. From Zulamon, the Zandalari emissaries observing the unfolding war noted everything with pleasure. Even the elves and their potent arcane powers could not withstand the might of the Amani, the might of the troll race. The troll's victory was only a matter of time. King Thoradin kept a watchful eye over the intensifying war between the High Elves and the Trolls. Scouts returned to Strom with tales of smoke rising along Quel'Thalas's borders, of brutalized elven corpses littering once tranquil grottos in the Northlands. Clearly the Trolls were winning, but Thoradin clung to his stubborn belief that the intervening conflict would put his people at an unnecessary risk. However, Thoradin's opinion changed when a group of High Elven ambassadors sent by King Anasterion Sunstrider arrived at Strom. Bye, Jay. With growing horror, Thoradin listened as the messengers related firsthand the accounts of the Amani's stark brutality and the otherworldly Loa who fought at their side. The Amani threat was greater than Thoradin or his advisors had ever imagined. The High Elves argued that without assistance from Erethdar, they would destroy Quel'Thalas, and after that, launch a full might of their blood-crazed warbands against Strom itself. Following the meeting, Thoradin consulted with his advisors. They agreed that allying with the elves was prudent, but they also knew that Erethdar did not have the forces to fight an open war with the trolls. Thoradin and his advisors debated well into the night before coming to a conclusion. If humans were taught magic, it might give them the edge they need to truly make an impact in the war. Interesting. Elven magic was legendary amongst humans, but they had never learned its secrets. Although Thoradin harbored a deep suspicion of sorcery in all its forms, he knew his forces would need it to vanquish the Amani. The next day, Thoradin returned to the ambassadors with an offer. In exchange for military aid, the High Elves would teach the humans magic. The High Elves dispatched messengers to consult King Anasterion. Like all of his kind, he knew well the dangers of unchecked magic. Teaching the arcane arts to humans could easily lead to disaster. Yet, as much as this possibility troubled Anasterion, his own people were facing extinction. Knowing he had little choice, he agreed the High Elves would tutor 100 humans in the rudimentary ways of magic. Before long, elven magi journeyed to Strom and began hastily teaching their 100 humans. Over the course of many months, the tutors observed something remarkable in their students. Although the humans lacked grace or subtlety, they had an innate affinity for magic. Meanwhile, Thoradin ordered his generals to establish a stronghold at the base of Alterac Mountains. This would act as a staging point for the future offensive against the trolls. Thoradin's generals also erected other crude forts in the Eastwild, a large stretch of fertile foothills east of the Tircival Glades. However, Alterac Fortress would remain the humans' most important northern holding. Once the elves had finished tutoring the human magi, Erethdor began its offensive. Over 20,000 soldiers gathered at Alterac. From there, Thoradin himself led the forces towards Quel'Thalas. He did not, however, bring the magi with him. They would be behind the walls of Alterac. If things progressed as he hoped, the magi would play a part later in the war. Generals Igneous and Lordain acted as the vanguards of Erethdor's armies. Riding days ahead of the advancing Arathi host, they cleared the way north and slaughtered any troll scouts and raiding parties they could find. After weeks of hard marching, the full might of Erethdor's armies finally reached the outskirts of Quel'Thalas and smashed into the southern flank of the Amani. In coordination with the Arathi, the High Elves launched a counterattack from the north and laid waste to the trolls' front lines. The Amani now found themselves fighting a war on two fronts. Yet Jintha remained confident the trolls would emerge victorious. The elves' decision to ally with the primitive humans reeked of desperation. The Arathi had a reputation as warriors, but they lacked power or discipline. The crude humans were a nuisance, one Jintha would quickly eradicate. Intent on destroying Erethdor's armies, he turned his warbound south to crush the humans. Once he had slaughtered them, Jintha would refocus his forces on Quel'Thalas and exterminate the humans for good, or the elves for good. On Thoradin's orders, the humans began a slow retreat back towards Alterac. Weeks of brutal and bloody fighting followed as the overconfident Amani chased Erethdor's armies to the mountains. As the humans moved south, the High Elves emerged from Quel'Thalas and marched for Alterac as well. They constantly harried the northern flank of the Amani, slowly whittling down the trolls' rear guard. Upon finally reaching Alterac Fortress, Thoradin was pleased to find the Amani were still in full pursuit. He readied his forces for the attack he knew was about to come. One morning, as a thick fog enveloped the Alterac foothills, the Amani fell upon the human army. Although outnumbered, the Arathi fought back with unexpected tenacity. The battle raged on for days, with neither side giving ground. Before long, the High Elves arrived from the north and assailed the Amani on a second front. When the humans and elves were confident they had worn down the Amani ranks, they unleashed their secret weapon, the human magi. Throughout the recent days of fighting, Thoradin had kept all 100 of them within the Alterac fortress. Now it was time to test their mettle in battle. Alongside the elven sorcerers, the human magi called upon their vast, newfound powers. Instead of attacking individually, the magi did something unprecedented. They pooled all of their power into one terrible spell. The Alterac mountains heaved and trembled as torrents of fire lashed down from blood-red sky. The energies engulfed the Amani in searing conflagration. Sorcerer's flames burned Loa and Troll from the inside out. Among the first of the Amani to be consumed was Jintha. Without their leader, the surviving trolls broke ranks and retreated north. The humans and elves hunted them down like game, slaughtering every Amani combatant they could find. The disastrous battle floored the Zandalari. Once so confident of victory, They skulked back to their island home in disbelief and shame. For then, the defeat marked a dark turning point in troll history, one from which their race has not yet recovered. Yet for Quel'Thalas and Erethdor, the war was the beginning of a glorious new era. For months after the cessation of the conflict, celebrations graced the streets of Strom and Silvermoon. The grateful elves pledged their undying loyalty to Erethdor and to his descendants. By the way, that right here, you see this? That's the fire. I'm going to just pull it back. That's the firestorm that they unleashed upon the trolls. It's, yeah, that's pretty devastating looking. You can actually see thousands of trolls just being ashed down there. Literally ashed. Sidebar. During the retreat to Alterac, the Amani began gaining on the humans too fast, threatening to outflank and overwhelm the Erethdor's armies. To avert disaster, General Lordain volunteered to waylay the trolls, knowing full well he would not survive. He and 500 of his bravest volunteers held off the Amani host in a narrow valley, while the rest of the Arathi army continued the retreat south. Lordain and his warriors paid their ultimate price, but the valiant stand helped secure victory for humans and elves alike. Lordain's legacy of pure selflessness and sacrifice would live on amongst his people in the coming millennia. After King Thoradin's reign had ended, new generations of humans expanded the nation of Erethdor in size and power. Many of the first human magi tutored pupils in the way of the arcane. Within a few decades, the number of spellcasters within Erethdor had increased dramatically. Protected from the natural threats by these powerful magi, enterprising humans founded new Arathi settlements on the frontier lands. Some claimed the verdant pastures of the Eastwild, territories once lorded over by the trolls. Others migrated to the Alterac fortress and the smaller forts built during the Troll Wars. These fortified holdings soon flourished into bustling towns. The most coveted and fertile lands were located in the Tirsifal glades. There, the Arathi established a stronghold to protect their farmlands from gnolls, kobolds, and other dangerous wildlife. Many former soldiers settled in this region, which they named Lordaeron, in honor of their fallen general, Lordain. Once Arathi expanded to the coastal region known as Gilneas, they constructed a series of robust harbors. The settlers fished the waters and engaged in rigorous trade with other parts of Erethdor. The boldest of these sailors ventured into the open waters around Gilneas, and in time discovered a large island that was rich in metal ores and other valuable natural resources. Several of the sailors stayed on this island and ended up founding a mighty maritime outpost, Kul Tiras. Over the decades, these new cities continued to grow and develop their own unique customs. The ruling powers in Erethdor's capital, Strom, were ever wary that they would become too independent. Despite the rulers' attempt to regain control over the kingdoms, many cities did eventually gain more autonomy. The first and most notable of these being the powerful trading outpost in the far northwest of Dalaran. Established in the heart of Erethdor, Dalaran quickly became a trading center of great import and influence. Citizens from across Erethdor flocked to the city in a quest for wealth and opportunity. One of these immigrants was a brilliant and eccentric mage named Ardagan. He won the admiration of Dalaran's populace and was elected its ruler. Under Ardagan's governance, Dalaran would continue expanding in power and would eventually evolve into an autonomous city-state. It would also become a much-needed haven for Erethdor's magi, a population the kingdom's citizenry increasingly viewed with suspicion and wariness. The growth and prosperity experienced by Erethdor was due in large part to the Magi and the protection they offered settlers. But even so, private distrust of the sorcerers festered amongst the populace. Over time, dissent and superstition grew, igniting tension between magic users and the rest of society. Most Magi withdrew from cities and towns, angry at being subjected to what they saw as baseless paranoia. Dalaran's ruler, Ardagan, invited many of these disgruntled Magi to his city. There he proclaimed they could live free of prejudice. Most of the Magi answered Ardagan's call and settled in Dalaran. When the first group of these sorcerers arrived, they decided to remake the city into a glorious center of knowledge. Using their great power, they expanded Dalaran in size and scope, raised gleaming spires throughout the city, and constructed vast libraries and repositories of arcane wonder. Artigan was the most powerful of these newly arrived magi, and they formed a magocracy to govern the burgeoning city. The ruling body was encouraged to study the practice of arcane arts, and as word of Dalaran spread, magi from across Erethdor began to see it as a symbol of hope and freedom. Within a few years, Dalaran exploded in population. Though only a small percent of the residents could wield the arcane, the protection they offered allowed trade and industry to grow unimpeded. Crime was virtually non-existent. The dangers of the wild were largely forgotten. But unchecked spellcasting had disastrous consequences. The reckless use of magic began tearing the fabric of reality in the region. Dalaran's mages were unaware of the waves of arcane energy billowing out from the city into the twisting nether. These tides of power drew the attention of scattered demons belonging to the Legion. A small number of these demons slipped into the physical world, infiltrating Dalaran itself. Though these creatures were weak, and usually alone, they succeeded in sowing chaos and terrorizing the peaceful city. The magocracy struggled to deal with these demonic intrusions, while also keeping the secret from the populace. More and more, the city's rulers feared that if the superstitious populace learned the truth, they would panic and riot. Eventually, the magocracy sought help from beyond the city's walls. They sent an urgent request to the elves of Quel'Thalas. The humans hoped that the elves, in their infinite wisdom, might understand how to deal with the sudden influx of demons. The ruling body of Quel'Thalas, the Council of Silvermon, immediately dispatched the elves' greatest magi to investigate. They determined that only a few demons had crossed the barrier, but the magi knew this was just the beginning. The problem would grow worse unless the magocracy placed a limit on the humans' use of magic. Many of Dalaran's leaders rejected the High Elves' recommendation. Magi had come to the city specifically so they could freely practice their arcane arts. Restricting them would result in a number of detrimental effects. At best, most of the brightest magi would simply leave and continue their arcane studies elsewhere. At worst, Dalaran's entire economy would collapse, sparking a revolt and scattering the magi to the far corners of the land. One way or another, the use of arcane magic would continue, within the walls or without. No matter what happened, the threat posed by the Legion would always exist. Amusingly, the Council of Silvermoon agreed they could not prohibit the use of magic, and instead decided on another solution. Together, they formed a clandestine order to deal with the demonic invaders. This new group met in a secret grove of the Glades to discuss its work. It became known as the Council of Tircifal. The Order's gifted members would be responsible for tracking and banishing any Legion agents wherever they might be found across the land. They would also quietly educate other mages about the dangers of reckless spellcasting. For decades, the first members of the Council of Tircifal discreetly tracked down and banished any demons they could find. When facing extraordinarily powerful foes, the Council's members would channel their abilities into a single individual who would act as a solitary vessel of their power for a short period of time. Empowering a single champion was a dangerous ritual. As such, it was done under only rare and dire circumstances. The council members would have to be in close proximity to perform the ritual, leaving them vulnerable. The massive influx of energies also had the potential to destroy the appointed champion. But if they survived, they would overwhelm even the Burning Legion's mightiest agents. Despite the risk, the Council of Tircifal used this empowering technique to great effect for many years. But everything changed when a dreadlord named Cathrantir, I have no idea. I'm going to go with Cathrantir, infiltrated Dalaran. This cunning demon stalked the city's beautiful spires, spreading his poison to the hearts and minds of the populace. Terrible plague gripped Dalaran, and the affliction spread, and a veil of paranoia enveloped the city. By the way, this is one Nethraceme doing this. Upon investigating these phenomena, the Council of Tirceval discovered and confronted Cathronitir. The gifted magi found themselves outmatched by the demon. Seeing no other recourse, they moved to empower a high elf named Ayrton Brighthand as their champion. Ayrton hurled himself at Cathronitir, wielding the Council's combined might as his own. It was here that Cathronitir turned the Council's greatest weakness, strength, to his own advantage. Rather than face the champion directly, the demon struck out at the Order's members. With their energies in Brighthand's control, they could not defend themselves. Cathronitir's shadowy assault disrupted the connection between the Council members and him. This in turn weakened the champion's power, until eventually he fell to the demon. Only the desperate intervention of a young half-elf named Elodie spared the Council from total annihilation. Yeah, exactly, Raskor. Plus, it's a frickin' Nethrezim. The wary Council rallied for another barrier, but this time as individual magi with no champion to focus their strength. Cathronitir reveled in the Council's disarray, easily thwarting his adversaries. The defeat shattered the Council of Tircephal's confidence and hope. The Magi knew they could not overcome Cathronitir as individuals, nor could they rely on their empowerment ritual. In this dark moment, Elodie and his allies discovered a new way to wield their power. No longer would the Council members need to be present for the battle. Through a complex ritual, they would permanently grant someone a portion of their power. Elodie was the first to undergo this experimental technique. When the ritual proved successful, he declared himself not the Council's champion, but its guardian. The newly appointed, empowered Elodie faced and struck down Cathronitir, banishing the Dreadlord back to the roaring depths of the twisting nether. Hailed as a hero, Elodie would serve as the first guardian of Tirceval. He used his great powers to prolong his life, and for 100 years he hunted down the Legion's minions. At the end of his century of servitude, Elodie gave up his power voluntarily, choosing to live out the remainder of his days in peace and tranquility. So began the tradition of the Guardian. Every century, a new mage would arise to dedicate his or her life to safeguarding Azeroth. The Magi chosen to wield the Council's might would demonstrate their humility and commitment to peace by giving up their tremendous power after 100 years. For more than a millennium, an unprecedented era of prosperity reigned across all of Azeroth. Though conflict and suffering could not be entirely eradicated, the Guardians ensured no demonic intruders could harm the world. As these noble individuals waged their lonely secret war against the Legion, Dalaran continued to serve as one of the world's foremost centers of arcane knowledge and research. Let's see something real quick here. The year negative 2,500. Ironforge. Far to the south of Dalaran, the ancient vault of Uldaman lay darkened and silent. Ages ago, Ironya and Arcades had gone into hibernation. Many of the mechanomes who had once watched over Uldaman's machineries had departed after being afflicted by the curse of flesh, but a handful of the faithful servants remained. Their once resilient forms gradually succumbed to the degradations of time. They broke down one by one, until only one was left. Although this lone mechanome did her best to maintain Uldaman, much of the stronghold fell into disrepair. Soon the curse of flesh began to chip away at her metallic form. The affliction eventually transformed her into a gnome, and she grew old and close to death. Aware that she did not have much time left, the gnome worked to free the earthen hibernating deep within Uldaman. She could not bear the thought that when she passed, they would be abandoned forever in the vault's dead halls. With her dying breath, she activated the earthen's hibernation chambers. The chambers stirred to life, and the Titan Forge slumbered within and awoke to a new world and a new destiny. The awakened earthen discovered they had been changed dramatically. The curse of flesh had taken its full toll, transforming them entirely into creatures of flesh and blood, creatures who would eventually call themselves dwarves. Groggy from years of slumber, The dwarves stumbled from the broken halls of Uldamon and emerged onto the surface of the world. They found themselves drawn to the west, where a range of majestic stone mountains towered into the clouds. Much like the gnomes who had left Uldamon centuries ago, the dwarves were forced to contend with savage beasts that prowled the land. Yet whereas the gnomes used their ingenuity to overcome these threats, the dwarves relied on resilience and strength. Eventually they reached the mountains they had seen on the western horizon, and settled in the snowy region of Dún Marog. Although the curse of flesh had diminished their memories, the dwarves still had faint ties to their Titan-forged heritage. Inspired by recollections of these past, they named their new home Cosmodon, or Mountain of Cos, in honor of the Titan shaper Cosgaroth. The dwarves retained a natural affinity to stoneworking and mining as well. They delved deep into the heart of Cosmodon's tallest mountain and crafted an immense forge. Around it, the dwarves built a proud city called Ironforge. This would become the seat of their new home, a great and mighty nation that would stretch deep into the mountains. As the dwarves set out to mine Cosmodon's mountains and expand their holdings, they discovered the gnomes dwelling nearby. The people of Ironforge were enthralled by the ingenuity and technological savvy of their diminutive neighbors. The dwarves also sensed natural kinship with the gnomes, due in part to their shared Titan-forged ancestry. The dwarves imparted their knowledge of stoneworking and construction to the gnomes, helping them lay the foundations of a wondrous city that would later be called Gnomeregan. In turn, the gnomes taught the dwarves engineering, science, introducing much-needed efficiency and advancements to Ironforge. Although the gnomes and dwarves would largely keep to themselves in the centuries that followed, they had formed an unbreakable bond and would always aid each other in times of need. Meanwhile, the year -1500. In the southern reaches of the eastern kingdoms, the Gurabashi trolls languished in poverty and hardship. They had never fully recovered from the destruction wrought by the Sundering. Many hunted and farming grounds were lost, and the famine was a constant companion for the Empire. Desperate to retain their former glory, the Gurabashi of Stranglethorn Vale eventually turned to the powerful Loa, whom all trolls worshipped. One such creature answered their call, the strongest Loa they'd ever encountered, Hakar the Soulflayer, Loa of Blood. The malevolent spirit promised to help the Gurabashi extend their empire across the lower half of the eastern kingdoms. In return, he demanded a huge number of living sacrifices. The Gurabashi who pledged their loyalties to Hakar became known as the Hakari. They soundly defeated the nearby Gnolls and Murlocs, as well as other trolls who opposed Hakar. Yeah, no kidding, Darsh Monster. Those taken prisoner soon wished they had died in battle. Hakar's disembodied spirit gorged on the blood of the captives for years. Under Hakari's control, the Gurabashi had achieved all they'd hoped, conquering vast swaths of land and even many of the islands that dotted the South Seas. The Zandalari, observing these events from afar, were at first pleased by the Gurabashi's return to conquest and traditional ways. Yet once it became clear that Hakar's bloodlust would never be sated, they knew the fiendish god would not only drive the troll race to destruction, but to the death of the whole world. The Zandalari rallied their forces and set sail for the eastern kingdoms. There they met the Gurabashi who had kept their descent hidden from the Hakari. The Zandalari and their new allies learned that a faction of Hakar's most zealous priests, the Atalai, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, were attempting to summon the lowest spirit into physical form. This would in turn awaken terrible new dimensions of his power and spell certain doom for the troll race. This makes sense, by the way. We do know for a fact that a Loa who takes physical form is actually way stronger than a normal Loa would be. We've seen this in the Celestials and in Cenarius, to name two examples right there. A number of his fanatical Atalai priests had also escaped into the jungles surrounding Zul'Gurub. These trolls eventually settled in the Swamp of Sorrows, north of the Gurabashi capital. In the heart of the marsh wildlands, they constructed a temple to their bloodthirsty Loa, the Temple of Atal Hakar. Deep within the temple, the Atalai continued their worship of Hakar. They practiced grisly rituals and ceremonies, hoping to summon the Loa into the physical world. Dark magics twisted the flora and fauna surrounding the temple, which drew the attention of the green dragon aspect, Izera. Upon learning of the Atalai's plans to summon Hakar, Izera unleashed her power on the temple and its inhabitants. The dragon aspect's attack buckled the temple's walls and blasted its foundations apart. The immense ziggurat began sinking beneath the land. As the swampy mire engulfed the temple, the terrified Atalai abandoned their rituals and scattered to the marshlands. Though Izera had thwarted Hakar's return, she knew the Atalai might someday attempt to summon the Loa again. Thus she commanded a number of her loyal green dragons to watch over the ruined temple and ensure it would never again be used to bring evil into the world. And yes, that's the sunken temple. No, they'd probably still go up in power, Darshmaster, but a Loa who comes back to become a troll would be even stronger. So this is a really cool picture of Dire Maul that I don't have a picture to show you of, sorry. There's a cool picture of Dire Maul. Eldrathalas. I actually just told this story not too long ago. Far across the sea from the Gurubashi Empire, a secretive society of highborn who had survived the Great Sundering grappled with an uncertain future. They were known as the Shendralar, those who remain hidden. Nearly 10,000 years before, Queen Ashara had charged them with the storage and safekeeping of her most precious tomes. Led by Prince Tortheldrin, the Shendralar dutifully obeyed their queen. They journeyed to the misty heart of Kalimdor's southern jungles and established a grand city called Eldrathalas. Eldrathalas. When the Great Sundering later decimated the world, Eldrathalas narrowly escaped destruction. Only the efforts of Tortheldrin and his followers spared the city. Together they wove a great spell to shield Eldrathalas from destructive forces of the Sundering. Although they had saved the city, the Shendralars soon discovered that the Well of Eternity had been consumed in the Sundering. Without the font of power to draw upon, Tortheldrin and his followers saw their immortality begin to diminish. Shendralar soon fell into a lethargy and languished in their isolated sanctuary. Tortheldrin eventually formulated a plan to revitalize the Shendralar. He forged pylons in one of the damaged wings of Eldrathalas, constructing a prison to house a new source of power, a demon called Imilthar. To the shock of the other Shendralar, Tortheldrin had covertly summoned and bound this terrifying demon to siphon the demon's powers and give it to his followers. Any objections were quickly settled once the other Shendralar experienced the energies for themselves. Although dark and volatile, Imilthar's power was invigorating and addictive, more so than the Well of Eternity ever had been, because as we know, fel magic is way more addictive than arcane magic. The Shendralar reveled in their newfound source of power, but they knew that keeping Imilthar in their midst was dangerous. Thus they developed the means to use the demon's power to keep him imprisoned. For thousands of years all seemed well. Yet the cost of keeping Imilthar restrained required more and more power. Almost 9,000 years after the Sundering, 10,000 years after the Sundering, the demon's prison crossed a dangerous threshold. It began consuming so much energy that the Shendralar were left with none to siphon for themselves. Almost overnight, his seemingly ingenious plan unraveled, and his access to the demon's magic was gone. Not only had the Shendralar lost their immortality once again, they had grown hopelessly addicted to Imilthar's potent energies. Desperate to regain his power, Tortheldrin plotted with his closest allies and murdered other Shendralar in cold blood. Tortheldrin's treacherous plan worked. Having thinned the population, the remaining elves could draw on his power. And when Shendralar's numbers diminished, Tortheldrin and his followers abandoned their once glorious city. The greater part of Eldrathalas fell into ruin, darkness, and despair. Soon other creatures from the surrounding jungles moved in to stake their claim on the crumbling elven refuge. As Tortheldrin and his followers retreated deep into Eldrathalas, well, we defeated him in Dire Maul, Nero says. But yes, as of WoW's beginning, he is still there. The kingdom of Erethdor began to split apart. The once small trading outposts and cities that had been established after the Troll Wars had grown into the mighty city-states of their own. Eventually, Strom saw its influence over these kingdoms slip away. The island bastion of Kultiras continued its tradition of trading and shipping. The city-state boasts a massive navy, largest in all of Arathor. Its most daring captains explored the coast of the eastern continent. Kultiras' shipping and fishing economy eclipsed the maritime power of its northern neighbor, Gilneas. Unable to compete with Kultiras' burgeoning navy, Gilneas focused its bolstering its land armies and mercantile capabilities. The military of Gilneas became the most powerful one in all of Arathor, equaled only by the city-state of Alterok, which held dominion over the Northlands. How's that for funny? Gilneas and Alterac often combined their forces and led grand expeditions to secure the borders of Arathor. South of Strom, in Cosmodon, they discovered the dwarves and the gnomes. The expeditionary forces marveled at the wondrous feats of construction and engineering that were in Ironforge and Gnomeregan. The humans became quick friends with the races, especially the dwarves, who they shared a love of battle, storytelling, and ale. Three cultures engaged in rigorous trade, knowledge, and exchanging of smithing, mining, engineering, and arcane magic. Over the years, Strom's power continued to wane. Bound by rocky, mountainous terrain and lacking natural resources, Strom just could not compete with the economies of the other city-states. Eventually, many of Strom's noble families departed to the fertile valleys and pastures of the north. There they founded the city-state named after the surrounding region, Lordaeron. The nobles used their wealth to buy up large plots of land, some of which were developed by earlier settlers, for example, Huggemund Mills and the Balnir and Soledin Mills. What are you linking, Braven? After the Troll Wars... Oh, I'm reading the wrong thing. Lordaeron was also home to a deeply religious group who believed in the light, a cosmic power they claimed infused every living being into existence. Many sick and elderly people traveled to religious communes in Lordaeron, hoping to secure some cure for their ailment. Others made pilgrimages to the city-state in search of wisdom and enlightenment. Lordaeron's borders quickly expanded and matured into a proper kingdom. The noble families eventually renamed the heart of their flourishing nation, Capital City, because they're very inventive with their names. Not long after the Lords of Strom went north, the last living descendants of King Thoradin also left Arathor. Led by a member of Thoradin's line named Faldir, they set off by sea and ventured far to the south, enticed by rumors of lush, unplumbed land where they could make a new beginning. The stories proved to be true. Lost my case. Thoradin's descendants settled in the land and founded the Kingdom of Stormwind. Nestled amongst the cliffs and boasting a natural protected harbor, this city-state established itself as a major power in the region. Strom was left in the hands of a few ruling families too arrogant and too stubborn to abandon the old capital. Among them were the descendants of Igneous Trollbane, the general who had become legend during the Troll Wars. Over the years, the families rebuilt Strom's crumbling infrastructure and renamed their capital Stromgard. The city, however, would never retain its former glory. Thank you, Bremen. Indeed, Thoradin's dream of a unified people was dying. Over generations, the various city-states became increasingly distant and insular. Rivalries emerged as the nations turned inward, concerned with their own well-being, and less inclined to offer aid to the other. So the original kingdom of Arathor split up into the great city-states which eventually governed all human society. Stromgard, Alterac, Lordaeron, Dalaran, Gilneas, Kultiras, and Stormwind. All of which we have, all of it except for one, we have now seen on camera. Also, this picture is really high detail. They've even got the rivers in the right place. This is really nice. After the Troll Wars, a number of human priests began having faint visions and dreams of angelic beings, geometric forms that thrummed with living light. Although they did not know it, the priests had actually communed directly with the Naru. Through this connection, the Naru guided the hearts of the humans and introduced them to the holy light. From their tenuous connection with the Naru, the priests learned to harness the extraordinary healing powers of the light. They formed a religious movement based on the tenets of justice, peace, and altruism. Popular among common folk, the movement flourished. Now we're going to cover a few other little interesting tidbits. For example, Moradin. For thousands of years, the nomadic Tauren wandered the Kalimdar's lush forests, living in harmony with the nature and the elements. Of the many lands the tribes roamed, one in particular became sacred ground for all Tauren shaman. It was called Mashanashi, or Loom of the Earth Mother, named in honor of their mythical deity who they believed had created the whole world. This verdant grassland sat along Kalimdor's western coast, wedged between the jungles of Feralas and the Stone Talon Mountains. If you're paying attention, that's Desolace. Or what would eventually be Desolace. No, they did not, Magister. Or rather, they had no concept of what Anaru was, so... Drawn by faint elemental whisperers, the Tauren shamans grew convinced the Earth Mother herself dwelled beneath the meadows. They spent decades trying to wake her by communing with the region's elements and conducting celebratory rituals. The shaman eventually succeeded, but discovered the Whisperers were something a little bit different than the benevolent Earth Mother. They were the echoes of something darker, something from Azeroth's old violent past. From the depths of a massive cavern below the grasslands emerged a colossal earth elemental, Princess Theradras. A instrument of the elemental ruler, a descendant, I don't know why I said instrument, a descendant of the elemental ruler Therazane. In ages past, the Keepers had imprisoned most of the elementals in another plane of existence, but some, like Theradras, had eluded this, and they had hidden beneath the earth, falling into deep slumber. The millennia of sleep had slowly weakened her mighty form. The newly awakened Theradras reached out to the verdant surroundings and consumed their energy. Invigorating power flooded through the elemental, regenerating her craggy form. Her siphoning left enormous tracts of land desiccated. Plant life across Mashanishi withered and died. The horrified Tauren, now forced to scavenge for sustenance, would later rename the plains Desolace. The sudden, violent death of such a vast, intertwined ecosystem sent ripples throughout Azeroth and beyond. Many of the mortal druids and spirits in the Emerald Dream reeled at the staggering loss of life. One of Cenarius' woodland sons, Zeatar, emerged from the dream to investigate. Much like his father, Zeatar walked the earth in the form of a majestic half-stag. Vines and verdant leaves circled his limbs and great antlers. Wherever his hooves touched the soil, dozens of saplings would sprout. In time they would bloom into lush forests. Zeatar's investigations led him to the damp caverns beneath Desolace, where he discovered Theradras. Though he set his mind to imprisoning the strange creature, he soon grew enchanted with the princess. The stolen life energies radiated from her and enticed him, and he became enthralled by her beauty. Theradras also found Zeatar beautiful, and resolved to do whatever she could to win his love. The elemental princess was keenly aware of the influence she held over him, and used this to her advantage. She claimed she had meant no harm to the land, and she was seeking to restore the region to its former beauty. Together, she urged, maybe they could be succeeding. Zeatar abandoned his earlier quest and became Theodrus' mate. He knew it was against nature, but he could not deny what he felt in his heart. From this forbidden union, somehow, an aberrant race was born, called the Centaur. Their barbarism would come to terrorize the lands of Kalimdor. What the Centaur lacked in elegance or beauty, they made up for in strength. Their horse-like lower bodies offered them great speed, and their burly humanoid torsos gave them incredible power. Yet the Centaur's penchant for brutality overshadowed all other traits. Upon seeing the Centaur, Zeatar recognized the depth of his sin. Though he tried to connect with his offspring, he could not bear their presence. The Centaur recognized the loathing in their father's eyes, and it drove them into a blind rage. The savage horseman lashed out, striking him down. Zeatar's death shattered Theradras' heart, which I find interesting because, as I pointed out, she did actually care about him, oddly enough. Hey, Rory. The elemental princess chastised the Centaur for their senseless murder, and they grew forlorn at realizing they had hurt their beloved mother. They begged her forgiveness and promised from that day forward they would honor her and revere their late father. Theradras later entombed Zeatar's spirit in the very cavern where she had once slumbered. The centaur would name this site Moradin, and ever after they would treat it as holy ground. The centaur proliferated and fanned out across Desolus. They unleashed their wrath on hapless Tauren, forcing them to abandon their homes. Yet Therogis's barbarous children did not stop in Desolus. In the centuries that followed, marauding bands of centaur would hunt the Kalimdor Tauren, igniting a long, dark period of war between the two races. The year -975. We talked about this pretty recently, too. The War of the Shifting Sands. Since the last war against the Troll Empire, the descendants of the Akir had stayed hidden in their subterranean domain. Only the Mantid of Pandaria remained an active threat. Nearly all of Azeroth's races had forgotten the ruthless potential of the insectoid colonies beneath the earth. One of these colonies, the Karaji, had taken root in the ancient fortress of An-Karaj. The Keepers had originally built the stronghold to imprison Cthulhu. There, within An-Karaj's lifeless sandstone corridors, the insectoids had lain dormant. Although through Ashara and her Night Elf Empire had once known of the fortress, its existence had become lost to time. Few living creatures dwelled near An-Karaj, due in part to the vast, inhospitable desert of Silithus, stretching out from the stronghold's towering obelisks. An-Karaj wasn't rediscovered by the elves until Archdruid Fandral Staghelm initiated a quest to regrow the lands of Silithus. He dispatched his warrior son, Volston, and a group of the most trusted druids into this task. Hey, Titans. They trudged across the scalding dunes, searching for hidden water reservoirs they could use to transform the region into a lush forest. Volston and his comrades eventually stumbled across An-Karaj. Though some of the druids cautioned against entering the fortress, Fandral's son forged ahead. His presence in the cold, dead halls roused the Karaji back to life. From its prison beneath An-Karaj, Cthulhu also became aware of the awakened Karaji. The old god drove the insectoids into a murderous frenzy. The highest castes of Karaji society began organizing their lesser minions, the most numerous of which were called the Silithid. These vicious insectoids came in many forms, and all obeyed the will of the Karaji overlords. After the discovery of the Karaji, shocked Valston and his druid companions. Upon retreating from An-Karaj, they established a small outpost in Silithus to watch over the insectoids. Before their eyes, the fortress swelled with greater and greater numbers of Karaji. Then, without warning, a massive army spilled forth from the tunnels beneath An-Karaj. At the head of this swarming host were the Karaji. They were directed their Silithid minions to engulf the surrounding deserts and spread to the other regions as well. By this time, Volston had called for help from his father. Fandral rallied a force of druids, sentinels, priestesses, and keepers of the grove to deal with the Karaji threat. In the southern reaches of Kalimdor, the Night Elf host clashed with their vicious throes. At times they managed to drive them back, only for the insectoids to mount a counterattack and regain the advantage. This ebb and flow continued for months, leaving in its wake broken corpses of elves and insectoids alike. Fandral and his comrades established outposts along southern Kalimdor as they prosecuted the war. From these locations, they continued their brutal fight against the Karaji. Eventually, the tireless druids and their allies managed to push the Karaji back into the heart of Silithus itself. Yet just as victory seemed within reach, the war took a dire turn. During a feint orchestrated by the Karaji, Volston was captured and ripped apart before Fandral's very eyes. Volston's death shattered the Archdruid and sowed uncertainty throughout the elven ranks, and Fandral never recovered from that, by the way. The Karaji seized the opportunity and swarmed out of Silithus once again, pushing into the eastern deserts of Tanarus. In their fervor, they assaulted the sanctum of the Bronze Dragonflight. The Karaji's reckless attack spurred the Bronzeflight into action. Led by Anachronos, they enlisted the help of the red, green, and blue dragonflights. The mighty dragons joined the Night Elves and helped drive the Karaji armies back behind the walls of An-Karaj. But even the mighty dragons joining the war, the Karaji were simply too numerous to vanquish entirely. Fandral feared the war would never end. Thousands of elves have already perished at the claws of the insectoids, and he was loath to sacrifice more of his people. Ultimately, he and the dragons devised a means to end the war immediately. they would lock the insectoids within Ahn'Qiraj itself. Again, I feel like pointing out, the Night Elves and dragons gathered before Ahn'Qiraj to complete this task. Fandral called on his druids to focus their powers as one. Along with Anachronos, the elves summoned a great barrier to close off Ahn'Qiraj. Outside the cursed city, the dried earth split wide, and a magical barrier of stone and roots emerged. The impenetrable scarab wall towered high over the barren landscape, effectively sealing the Qiraji within their city forever. As a final act, Anachronos forged 2 mystical artifacts. Yeah, no kidding, Magister. The Scarab Gong and the Scepter of the Shifting Sands. The dragon entrusted the scepter to Fandral. Should the need ever arise to enter Ahn'Qiraj again, he could use the artifact to open the Scarab Wall. Fandral found no solace in ending the Qiraji threat, for Volston's death still tormented him. In his rage, he shattered the scepter, and the pieces became lost until the players found it. We could do an open discussion. I don't mind that. Also, this book will not, Agamemnon. What Magister said is something worthy of note. This is like one army that's beating back all the combined forces of all of Kalimdor. And it took all the combined forces of Kalimdor to stop this army. Imagine what the trolls did against the greater bulk of the Qiraji and Akir forces, and the Naraki too. Or actually, I guess the trolls never fought the Naraki. Sorry, I mean the Akir. The Akir is what I meant. I just mentioned that because, once again, you don't mess with trolls. The year -823. As the years passed in Dalaran, new guardians of Tirsafal came and went. Some retired in peace. Others fell during the tireless war against the Legion's agents. Nevertheless, Dalaran remained safe under the Guardian's watchful eye. One of the last Guardians was a brilliant magus named Skavel. The end of his century of commitment, he found no suitable candidate to take his place. The Council, worried about what would happen in the years or decades it took to find another Guardian, requested Skarvel remain in his position. The human was actually reluctant, but he ultimately agreed. After all, the century was only tradition, not a law. The relationship between Skarvel and the Council was actually quite strong. Together, they continued to protect the world from the Legion's predations. Years passed before Skarvel finally found a group of apprentices who might succeed in them. Among them was a woman named Egwin. Egwin distinguished herself as the most skilled and dedicated of the prospects. The Council of Tirsfall eventually bestowed the honor of guardianship upon her with Skavel's blessing. She immediately began banishing the forces of darkness. Egwin was a brilliant guardian, but she was also very stubborn and very bullheaded in her actions and her relations with the Council. Her deep-seated mistrust of authority figures put her at odds with the Elder Magi. Ignoring their recommendations and advice, Egwin forged her own path during her long years as the Guardian. Yet the Council was not actually troubled by her demeanor. The Magi knew that Egwin was a sorceress without equal, a prodigy capable of wielding massive amounts of arcane energy. Her effectiveness as Guardian outweighed her unpredictability and her penchant for disobedience. Near the end of her century of stewardship, Egwin sensed something dark stirring in the icy lands of Northrend. She traveled to the distant continent and discovered a pack of demons that were hunting blue dragons, feeding on their potent energies. Although mighty, the dragons could not withstand the Legion's cunning. Egwin immediately journeyed to the Tower of Wormrest and the hallowed shrine of all dragons. She called upon the majestic creatures to make good on their pact to protect the world from evil. Led by Alexstrasza the Lifebinder, several of the Dragonflight agreed to fight at the Guardian's side. Together they staged an ambush near the gigantic remains of Galakrond. The demons fell into Egwin's trap. As a blizzard tore over the terrain, the Guardian and her winged allies overwhelmed the Legion's minions. Yet neither Egwin nor the dragons expected what came next. The skies of Northrend churned and darkened. A monstrous demonic form emerged on the battlefield. The avatar of the Demon Lord, a tiny portion of Sargeras' vast cosmic power, yet nonetheless he radiated great strength and fury. He unleashed his terrible might on Aegwin, intending to destroy the Guardian who had thwarted his agent for so long. Aegwin did not hesitate to fight back. She summoned her powers and brought them to bear against the Avatar of Sargeras. What followed was the most difficult battle she had or ever has fought. In the shadow of Galakrond's gargantuan remains, Sargeras and the Guardian called down the fury of the heavens. Their attacks tore the darkened skies asunder and scarred the icy crust of Northrend. A storm of magic engulfed the region and held even the mighty dragons at bay. With a final, relentless flurry of spellwork, Aegwin defeated her foe. Though drained from the effort, she was victorious. Or so it seemed. When Aegwin had struck Sargeras down, he transferred his spirit to her weakened body. There, the sliver of Sargeras' malevolence would remain, lurking in the depths of her soul. Unaware of the dark presence within her, Aegwin gathered Sargeras' colossal broken form to seal it where it could harm no one else. She considered many locations to serve as the Demon Lord's final resting place. In the end, she chose the ancient night elf city of Suramar, some of which had been blasted to the bottom of the sea during the Sundering. During the War of the Ancients, the Legion had attempted to open a gateway within Suramar itself. This plan had been foiled by the Highborn, led by Grand Magistrix Elisand. These powerful sorcerers had created enchanted seals to close the demon's portal and negate nearby fell energies. When the Sundering later tore the world, the part of Suramar containing the Legion's failed gateway was sucked beneath the waves. It was in these lost ruins that drew Aegwin's attention. Knowing the Highborn seals would nullify whatever evil still lingered, she buried the Demon Lord's broken body within the sunken portion of Suramar. Aegwin hoped Sargeras' remains would lie undisturbed until the end of time. And then Warcraft 2 happened. The year -800. While Guardian Aegwin kept watch over the world of Azeroth, the lonely Pandaren continued their isolated existence. Life on the homeland of Pandaria progressed in relative peace, save for the century-long mantid assault on the Serpent's Spine. As a result, the Pandaren were content to live out their days behind the thick mists that shrouded their domain. They all believed that the rest of Azeroth had been annihilated by the Sundering. But a young Pandaren, Lu Lang, did not share this belief. He had been raised on a small ranch in the tranquil valley of the Four Winds. He often wandered the cliffs looking at the sea, wondering if anything existed beyond the horizon. His curiosity led him to make a bold proclamation. He would embark upon a great sea voyage and discover once and for all what had become of the outside world. Ignoring the warnings and the ridicule of his fellow Pandaren, Lu Lang gathered a few meager supplies and began his journey. Atop a turtle he named Shenzin Su, he sailed through the cloaking mists. Time passed without word from Lu Lang, and the other Pandaren believed he must have died on his foolhardy venture. 5 years later, Lu Lang returned. He told incredible tales of mysterious lands and people on the other side of the seas. He gathered more supplies and set out once again. This time he would not go alone. Shenzin Su had grown larger over the years, and Lu Lang's stories had inspired one Pandaren to join him on the next leg of the journey. Her name was Shinizi. She would later become Lu Lang's wife. Every 5 years, Lu Lang returned. Each time, Shenzin Su had become larger, and more Pandaren decided to join the eccentric explorer for a life of adventure. This tradition continued for decades, until the great turtle had grown to the size of a giant island. We still don't know why the turtle grew. Misty mountains and lakes formed atop the turtle's shell. In time, villages sprawled up across the landscape. These became home to a thriving community of Pandaren, who would eventually call their unique refuge the Wandering Isle. On his final voyage from Pandaria, the elderly Lu Lang fell into a deep sleep from which he never awoke. In death, his spirit merged with the sea turtle himself. Lu Lang's tradition of bold exploration and daring to dream beyond the known did not die with him. The Pandaren of the Wandering Isle would carry on his values for many centuries to come. The year -600. After the battle in Northrend, Sargeras began twisting Aegwin's thoughts. He pushed her to isolate herself from the Council of Tirsfall, drawing on concerns that she had always harbored about the Order. Chief among those was something Egwin had recently discovered. The Council of Tearsifal's members were interfering in the politics of human nations. The Magi argued they were doing what was necessary. Their order had stayed in the shadows for far too long. With their knowledge and wisdom, they had the power to prevent war and suffering in the mortal world. Egwin, however, viewed the Council's shadowy activities with skepticism and unease. She feared that if she stepped down, they would choose a weaker guardian, one they could use to pursue political agendas. Thus Egwin decided to stay on as guardian past her first century. She used her powers to extend her own life for decades longer than would have ever been possible. Though some members of the council were displeased, they accepted her decision. After all, she had performed incredible feats during her time as the guardian. Over the next 100 years, Egwin's relationship with the council became more and more strained. Sargeras' subtle influence made her even more paranoid about her fellow Magi. Her growing unease led her to construct a refuge far from the eyes of the council. Aha! We finally know who built Karazhan. Her growing unease led her to construct a refuge far from the eyes of the council. Within its barren and remote Deadwind Pass, she constructed the Grand Tower known as Karazhan. Its whereabouts would remain a secret from the council for many years. Egwin would often retreat to Karazhan to work in peace and quiet. Yet the tower also served another vital purpose. It acted as a conduit for potent ley lines in the surrounding region, through which Egwin could siphon power when needed. In time, the aging members of the council passed away, their power still held in Egwin's grasp. New sorcerers arose to join the order. They continued the council's practice of interfering with the nations of the eastern kingdoms. Many of these members also pushed for a more hardline approach to deal with the wayward guardian and force her to relinquish her power. Nice, Callisto. During one of Egwin's rare visits to Dalaran, the council demanded she step down as guardian or face immediate consequences. Egwin balked at the threat. Her distrust of the council had now shifted to outright hostility. She told the Magi that putting the fate of Azeroth in their hands was tantamount to dooming the world. Furious with her behavior, the councils agreed to take action. If the guardian would not give up her power willingly, they would force her to do so. The council had long debated how best to do this. Some members proposed empowering a new guardian, but this new idea presented too many dangerous possibilities. If Egwin and another guardian were to do battle, the results could be disastrous. Of even greater concern was that a conflict would call public attention to their clandestine order. Ultimately, the council agreed on a more subtle course of action. They formed Tirsigard, an order of magi gilded with relics and armaments that would diminish the guardian's incredible powers. After years of training, these resourceful, gifted hunters were sent out to find Egwin and bring her back to Dalaran. The guardian eluded the Tirsigard with ease, but the hunters did succeed in finding Karazhan and reporting its location back to the council. With Karazhan no longer safe, she magically sealed the tower off from outsiders. She then set off to find a new refuge, one neither the council nor Tirsigard would find. After much consideration, she decided to build this stronghold in the ruins of Suramar beneath the sea. Her dwelling, the Guardian Sanctum, would remain hidden from the Tirsigard for centuries. That's in Legion, by the way. So, we literally just talked about this last weekend. The year negative 230. The War of the Three Hammers. Far from the hidden Guardian Sanctum, High King Modimus Anvilmar and his dwarves thrived in the mountain home of Ironforge. Over centuries, trade partnerships with the human city-states had filled Ironforge's coffers with riches. Great architectural feats, such as the Stone-Wrought Dam, attracted curious visitors from as far away as the elven kingdom of Quel'Thalas. Hang on. I'm like, in a bad way to do that right now. Isn't there like someone else you can link this to right now? There's Karazhan. Damn it. Okay. Moving on. Where was I? The Wildhammers lived among the craggy hills and icy slopes outside Ironforge. Led by Thane Cardros Wildhammer, they gained notoriety as adept and incredibly resilient mountaineers. Considered uncouth by the Bronzebeard clan, the Wildhammers struggled to gain more sway with Modimus and to solidify their place among the ruling elite of Ironforge. Sorcerer Thane Thaurazun ruled the Dark Irons, who inhabited the deepest, darkest corners of the city. Their long-standing practice of dabbling in sorcery, along with a bit of a thing for secrecy and political scheming, drew the ire of Ironforge's other inhabitants. Thaurazun held a firm control over the kingdom's richest gem and mineral deposits, using his wealth as leverage to protect his people and secure a place in Ironforge's increasingly volatile political arena. King Modimus strived to treat each clan with fairness and respect, but his inability to ease tensions between the factions inevitably led to disaster. The High King passed away from old age before his eldest son, and before his eldest son could be crowned, the simmering cauldron of Ironforge boiled over. No one knows who exactly struck the first blow. War ignited between the three clans as each vied for domination over the mountain. Bloody battles raged in every corner of the kingdom for several long, terrible years. In the end, the Bronzebeards used their martial expertise to drive the Wildhammers and Dark Irons and claim total victory. Cadros conceded, drove his clans north. The Wildhammers eventually settled in the wetlands and carved out a great subterranean city called Grim Batol, one that even rivaled Ironforge in scope and prestige. The earlier defeat weighed heavy on Cadros' shoulders, but in time, he and his kin accepted their lot and prospered in their new home. The Dark Irons ventured south to the tranquil Red Ridge Mountains. There they founded the new kingdom of Thaurazun, named after their leader. Although the people prospered, Thaurazun himself wallowed in humiliation. He dreamed of one day extracting retribution on his cousins in the north and claiming all of Cosmodon as his own. After years of secretly forging a new army, Thaurazun launched a brazen, two-pronged assault against the Bronzebeard and the Wildhammer. The Sorcerer Thane himself led the attack on Ironforge. He had bolstered his formidable Dark Iron warriors with legions of immense war golem and siege engines. The invaders reached the very heart of the city before the Bronzebeards finally rallied and pushed the Dark Irons all the way back to Red Ridge. Meanwhile, Thaurazun's wife, the sorceress Mogdud, led the second army against Grim Batol. The Dark Irons besieged the mighty fortress and called upon their dark magics to break the Wildhammer's will. They brought the shadows of Grim Batol to life, transforming the bustling city into a realm of nightmare and terror. Cadros led his Wildhammers in a daring counterattack and vanquished Mogdud. With her death, the Dark Irons retreated south, only to find themselves face to face with the armies of Ironforge. Madarin had caught wind of the attack and brought his forces north. The Bronzebeard and Wildhammers crushed the Dark Irons from both sides, utterly annihilating them. In the Dark Irons, Madarin and Cadros found new enemy and new purpose. They put aside old rivalries and marched their host southward, pledging they would not stop until they had purged Thaurazun and his treacherous Dark Irons from the face of the world. Here's the fun part, for those of you who haven't seen this part already. As the Bronzebeard and Wildhammer armies drew near, Thaurazun scrambled for a way to defeat his enemies. He decided to draw upon the fiery power from deep within the world to use it as a weapon. Thus Thaurazun wove a great spell to save his kingdom. Yet amidst his conjuration, his mind turned to the death of his wife and his recent defeats. Anger roiled through his heart. His rage grew so absolute that his spellwork breached the elemental plane and tapped into Ragnaros the Fire Lord. That's a slight retcon, actually, the specific thing that caused the spell to go wrong. It's still the spell going wrong, it's just a slight variance in the reason. Unwittingly, Thaurazun ripped Ragnaros from the elemental plane and summoned him into the surface of Azeroth. The earth buckled and wrenched apart. The Fire Lord's violent rebirth sparked a series of apocalyptic explosions that instantly killed the Sorcerer Thane and shattered the surrounding mountains. From afar, Madarin and Cadros watched in horror as the world was torn asunder with firestorms engulfing the area. They knew in that instant that Thaurazun had doomed himself and his people. Frightened for their own safety, the Wildhammers and Bronzebeards turned north and fled. In the years that followed the War of the Three Hammers, Madarin and his people rebuilt Ironforge. Kadros and the Wildhammers, however, chose to abandon Grim Batol. Mogdud had cursed the place greatly upon her death, leaving it uninhabitable. The Bronzebeards offered the Wildhammers a place in Ironforge, but it was a conciliatory gesture at best. Madarin knew in his heart that Kadros was much too proud to accept an offer. And as expected, the Wildhammer set out to forge a new future for his clan. Some of the Wildhammers settled in the region called Northeron, yet Kadros led most of his clan further north, to the ruins, into the wooded hinterlands. The memories of Grim Batol still haunted the Wildhammers, so they eschewed the subterranean dwellings of the past. Upon reaching the hinterlands, they built a majestic city, the Airy Peak, high in the mountains. The Wildhammers fostered their traditional ties with the natural world, practiced shamanism, and befriended intelligent half-lion, half-eagle griffins, creatures that called hooks and crannies in the mountains home. The griffins became emblematic of the Wildhammers, an inseparable part of their culture. Madarin and Kadros established diplomatic ties between the two healing nations. The Great Arch of Thandal Span was constructed as an economic and a symbolic bridge between the dwarven territories. Although rivalries... Interesting how this... It's almost like I planned it that way. Although rivalries would persist, the two leaders vowed never to take arms up against each other again, and if I'm not mistaken, they never have. When Kadros and Madarin passed away, their sons commissioned masons to forge two great statues of the leaders. The craftsmen erected these statues at the entrance to the Southlands, beyond which lay the Dark Iron territories. There the statues would maintain a tireless vigil, their stony eyes ever watching over the broken domain of their nemesis. Ragnaros' rebirth had devastated the Red Ridge Mountains. A raging volcano known as the Black Rock Mountain was now towering over the ruined Dark Iron Kingdom. The smoldering wasteland south of the volcano was called the Burning Steppes. The yawning chasm to the north, the Searing Gorge. Ragnaros himself retreated deep within the blistering heart of the Black Rock Mountain. From his lair he enslaved the surviving Dark Irons. The dwarves obeyed their elemental masters' every beck and call. They carved out a new fortress and called it Shadowforge City. Within their fiery home they would continue nursing their hatred of the others for generations. Side note. The Anvilmar's family control over Ironform came to end with the costly War of the Three Hammers. Madarin Bronzebeard assumed leadership of the dwarf nation, but he did not wish to make an enemy of its former rulers. Thus he offered the now-deposed Prince of Anvilmar and his family and his descendants a permanent seat on Ironforge's Senate. Meanwhile, year -100? Wow. Year -100, guys. This is way more recent than I thought. The liberation of Kazan. After the Sundering, the Zandalari set out to explore the numerous islands that dotted the newly formed sea between Kalimdor and the eastern kingdoms. It was during these voyages that the trolls discovered Kazan, an isle inhabited by goblins. These small green-skinned beings were clever, but crude. At first, the two races kept their distance from each other. The Zandalari had come looking in search of a strange mineral called Kajamite. The consumption of vaporized Kajamite caused a range of effects, such as heightened senses, hallucination, and increased intelligence. The trolls greatly valued the mineral and saw it as a sacred component of their rituals and ceremonies. For centuries, they mined the numerous Kajamite veins close to the surface of the islands. Occasionally, they employed goblins to work for them, paying them with shiny but cheap trinkets that the small creatures prized. Yeah, I know, right, Shmidov? Seriously. The arrangement changed once the trolls discovered an unimaginable deposit of Kajamite buried deep underground, more than the Zandalari would ever need. Rather than dig for it, they enslaved the goblins and forced them to mine under abysmal conditions. For thousands of years? Okay. Goblins suffered under the yoke of troll oppression, too weak to resist. In the end, it was the Kajamite itself that led to the goblin salvation. A cloud of Kajamite always blanketed the mines. Over time, breathing it in awakened the goblins' intelligence and craftiness. They plotted the overthrow of their masters, using what materials they could to fashion traps, explosives, or other weaponry. The troll overseers were caught off guard when the goblin masses stormed from the mines, armed with technology even beyond what the Zandalari possessed. The revolution shattered the trolls' hold over Kazan, laying waste to their mining operations and leaving behind destruction. The surviving Zandalari fled, and the goblins celebrated their new liberation by turning on each other in a mad scramble to fill the void of power. Amidst the chaos, countless factions and allegiances formed, the most powerful of which were eventually known as cartels. When there was no clear winner emerging from the fighting, the cartels brokered an uneasy truce. Conflict would never really end between the factions, but for decades they waged most of their battles in the economic arena. The cartels ultimately turned to trade to sustain themselves and used their profits to amass more wealth and power. I'm sorry, Sonoshi. So yeah, it sounds like, based on what I'm reading here, goblins are actually quite an old race, but goblins as we think of them, the intelligent, incredibly brilliant tinkerers, are much, much more recent than we thought. Way more recent than we thought. Only a century old? That's practically yesterday by Warcraft terms. Interesting. In ancient times, Keeper Mimiron had discovered Kajamite, used it to experiment on the races, enhancing their intellect. Some of these subjects were a small, primitive race that roamed the forest lands near Ulduar. Consuming the Kajamite can transform these creatures into a highly intelligent, industrious breed that would eventually be called goblins. The destruction caused by the Sundering cut off their supply of Kajamite. In just a few generations, their intelligence vanished. Those goblins who had found refuge in the Isle of Kazan had already forgotten the role Kajamite played in their society. Huh. You remember how we were speculating that if they don't keep drinking the Kajamite, they eventually go, woo? So here's an interesting one we haven't talked about yet, although we'll probably bring it up tomorrow. The year -75, the Knoll War. Throughout the Eastern Kingdoms, the disparate human nations flourished. The smallest and most isolated of these kingdoms was Stormwind. Over the years, it founded prosperity through the farmsteads that dotted the surrounding fertile region. As Stormwind's population grew, small towns sprang up in nearby Elwyn Forest, the Red Ridge Mountains, Brightwood, and the breadbasket of the kingdom, Westfall. Although the land was relatively peaceful, threats soon emerged. Packs of ferocious but simple-minded gnolls saw the humans as easy prey. The brutish creatures launched raiding parties against Stormwind's convoys, farmsteads, and even small towns. In response, Stormwind sent its valiant knights and other soldiers to diligently patrol the land. By the way, I hope you noticed they called Duskwood Brightwood, by the way. Just a nice point there. Stormwind City became a sanctuary for the refugees driven from their homes. The fortified heart of the kingdom offered not just safety, but spiritual guidance. Over the decades, devout clerics from the emergent Church of the Holy Light had ventured south from Lordaeron to spread their faith. Upon reaching Stormwind, these pious individuals founded the Holy Order of the Northshire Clerics. The kingdom looked to these clerics as a source of wisdom and comfort in hard times. While the devout clerics used the powers of the light to soothe the hearts and minds of Stormwind citizens, military forces patrolled the kingdom's borders. Although their vigilance prevented major bloodshed, the gnolls would remain a danger. During the reign of Barathan Rin, this lurking threat spiraled out of control. The gnolls began launching brazen attacks on Stormwind itself. It became clear these results were merely distractions. While soldiers defended the city, Westfall farmsteads would burn. The gnolls assailed the city in such numbers that few soldiers could be spared to protect the agriculture. This was no ordinary tactic for the gnolls, and for good reason. Never before had an intelligent leader emerged amongst their kind. Packlord Garfang, a cunning gnoll alpha of the Red Ridge Pack, had spent years conquering the other packs in the surrounding regions. Now he had an army of vicious raiders at his command, and the tactical wherewithal to use them efficiently. Within a year of the first attack, the gnolls had raided almost a third of all human settlements outside the city. And suddenly I'm just having trouble connecting to Twitch out of nowhere. Come back, Twitch. I guess it doesn't matter that much. This was King Barathon sent envoys to beseech Lordaeron, Gilneas, and other kingdoms for aid, but they would send no assistance, seeing no advantage in helping the smaller, rural nation end the threat. Stormwind was self-sufficient, so trade with the other kingdoms was rare, and their spiritual tendencies were seen as quaint. The humans of Stormwind would have to fend for themselves. The reluctance of the other nations infuriated King Barathon, and he resolved to take matters into his own hands. The Gnoll Packlord had been bold in attacking Stormwind City. He decided he would be equally bold to defeat him. The king and a small elite party of armored knights left the city under cover of darkness and waited for the next assault to hit the city walls. When the parties attacked, the king and his forces made their move, riding away from Stormwind toward the Red Ridge Mountains. Barathon's gambit paid off. The Packlord held nothing back for his raid, but he had not accompanied his warriors himself. Like most gnolls, Garfang loved letting others do hard work for him. But with all his armies away, the Packlord's camp in Redridge was exposed and undefended. Barathon's party battled Garfang and his personal guards for a full day and night. In the end, it was King Barathon himself who sank a blade into the Packlord's neck. Half of his knights had died, and the other survivors had been wounded, but he had ended Garfang's reign. When the Gnoll forces learned their leader was dead, they turned on each other. Several would-be Packlords battled to take Garfang's place, but none of them had the cunning or the guile to do it, and the Gnolls thinned their own numbers, leaving them unable to push deeper into the human lands anymore. King Barathon took advantage of the infighting. He rallied his soldiers and launched his forces into the Red Ridge Mountains, where they decimated what remained of the Gnolls. Although pockets of such hostile creatures would remain in the region, they would never again threaten Stormwind as they once had. King Barathon, thereafter known as the Adamant, was celebrated as a hero, and the kingdom of Stormwind entered a great time of prosperity. The victory had given Stormwind's people confidence they could handle any threat that might arise, even if they had to face it without the aid of the other kingdoms. Oh, God. In the years that followed, Stormwind would become even more distant from the northern kingdoms. So, as an aside, I just want to point out something here. This is a great example of what we're talking about when it comes to why the mongrel horde could actually be a threat. The idea that even gnolls could actually be a significant threat to a major nation like Stormwind. All they need is proper coordination and proper, working together and actual tactics, that kind of simple thing. Pardon me just a moment here. I need to refresh my throat. Thank you for the kind words. Yeah. Okay. The year -45. Far from Stormwind, the Council of Tearsfall continued its tireless hunt for the renegade guardian Aegwynn. Waves of unflagging Tearsagard scoured the world to find Aegwynn and hold her accountable for her defiance. No donation came, guys. There's no donation here. I haven't either, Hylisk. Makes sense, though, really. Where was I? Aegwynn, however, remained safe within her sanctum, deep within the sunken ruins of the ancient Suramar. Only rarely did she emerge to walk to the outside world. At times she would contact the Council of Tearsfall and observe its activities. Much to her dismay, she found the practice of interfering with politics becoming more and more overt and more troublesome. Now the Council was actively practicing statecraft. It was during one of these sojourns Aegwynn crossed the paths of Nialas Aran, one of the most dogged and unrelenting Tearsagard ever. He hounded the Guardian for months, using the enchanted artifacts at his command to nullify her magic and hamper her attempts to escape his grasp. These fierce encounters became like a game of wits between Iran and Aegwin. During their protracted duels, the opponents bantered back and forth, seeking insight into the other's overall strength and weaknesses. To Aegwin's surprise, she discovered Neelis harbored misgivings about the Council of Tirsifal. He was aware of the Order's political machinations, activities he did not condone. Neelis realized that Aegwin was not the traitorous rebel the Council made her out to be. As he discerned more about the Guardian's motivations, he began to sympathize with her plight. He also sensed Aegwin was wrestling with some unseen darkness in her soul. But for all his brilliance, he would never know this darkness was actually the lingering presence of Sargeras. He hoped to help Aegwin overcome her struggle, so he laid down his arms and abandoned his hunt. Before long, an unexpected love bloomed between the two former enemies. They agreed they could work together to prevent the Council of Tirsifal from ever having control over another Guardian. Knowing she could not maintain the mantle forever, she proposed a solution to Neelis. They would bear a child capable of inheriting Aegwin's Tirsfalan powers. Only then could a new Guardian arise free from the Council's manipulation. No, Aegwin is dead. Neelis readily agreed, seeing this plan as a redemptive act for Aegwin. If she could not purge the darkness within herself, perhaps she could create an heir who would be free of her own personal burdens. In time, Aegwin gave birth to a son. She called him the Keeper of Secrets in High Elven Tun, translated as Medivh. The infant possessed incredible affinity for magic, a natural gift passed down from both parents. Aegwin also locked her own power within him, where they would linger until Medivh reached maturity. There was, however, something much darker in Medivh, the lurking spirit of Sargeras. Although Aegwin did not know it, the demon lord had possessed the infant while he was still in her womb. Aegwin and Neelis searched far and wide for a place where Medivh could be raised. They ultimately settled on Stormwind due to its remote location and tenuous ties with Dalaran and the other northern nations. There, Neelis became the official conjurer of Stormwind's royal court. It's actually a bit of a retcon right there. Having secured the future for her son, Aegwin left Medivh in the care of Neelis. He would educate and tutor the boy in the ways of the arcane arts until the time at which came when Medivh assumed the role of guardian. Aegwin herself departed Stormwind, retiring from her duties. The long centuries had taken toll on her, and she could bear no more. She disappeared from sight, but always would watch her son from afar. Neelis' role as official conjurer meant that the young Medivh was also part of the royal court. As the boy grew older, he spent a lot of his time in the company of two other notable children, Anduin Lothar, descendant of the Arathi, and Lane Rin, prince of Stormwind. Despite their obvious joy in mischief and adventure, the three children were adored by the kingdom's populace. Medivh cherished his friendship with Anduin and Lane, for their activities were often an escape from Neelis' intensive tutoring. Although Medivh excelled in the arcane arts, his father rarely gave him praise. He was a cold, mirthless mentor, constantly pushing his son to achieve more. Neelis eventually revealed why he had placed this heavy burden on Medivh. He told his son of the Council of Tirsfal, the line of guardians, Medivh's own secret heritage. Neelis claimed that one day the boy would assume the role of guardian. The fate of the world would then rest squarely on his shoulders. The pressure of his destiny and his exhausting studies tormented Medivh's thoughts. The mounting anxiety led to disastrous consequences when the boy finally came of age. On the eve of his 14th birthday, the stress building within ignited his dormant guardian power. Fevered dreams assaulted the youth as the Tirsfallen energies howled to be unleashed. Neelis desperately struggled to help his son, but the incredible power within Medivh flashed out, killing his father. Thereafter, the boy fell into a coma. For many years, he lay unconscious in Stormwind's Northshire Abbey, tended to by clerics and watched over by faithful friends Anduin and Lane. When Medivh finally awoke, he found the world had changed around him. Lane was poised to succeed his father as King of Stormwind. Anduin Lothar had become a knight in the military, and as Medivh gradually acclimated to his new life, He recognized the incredible power at his fingertips and resolved to use it to protect the world from evil. Despite his strange coma, he appeared normal, and he assured the clerics nothing was amiss. Not even Medivh himself was aware that Sargeras was still within his soul, subtly twisting his every thought and action to a much darker end. At long last, the fallen Titan had found the perfect instrument with which to begin the Legion's next invasion of Azeroth. So what do you guys think? Rather interesting stuff, I admit. Some rather changing elements. Oh yeah, absolutely worth the money. Some rather changing elements of the distant history and the great cosmology. But there was also a few other relatively expected matters. It was a nice way to summarize a lot of events, though. I kind of get the point, especially for people who, unlike me, have not bothered to research all this stuff individually. We did learn a few new things. Just off the top of my head here, the nature of what Titans are is a good example of something. I don't remember the specifics, Lilu, sorry. The nature of what exactly the Titans are, the nature of what the Old Gods are, the nature of the Void Lords, and the fact that they exist and are actually the ultimate villains of the entire setting. The fact that Sargeras was not corrupted by anything, which I'm actually rather happy by that, by the way. There were a few different variances in some little details, like for example, where exactly the demons were coming from and the nature of what the Twisting Nether is, that kind of a thing. Anduin Lothar Hylisk and Lane Rin is what you were hearing. And Anduin, Lane, and Medivh were friends. So, anyways, what else did we learn that was new? Other than, of course, a few... there were actually some interesting details. One of the interesting things that's always been stated is they've always assumed that the Thunder King died of old age, but that wasn't true. The Tol'vir actually destroyed the Thunder King, along with the greater bulk of his and the Zandalari forces. That was definitely something new. We also learned a bit about why Uldum is this devastating desert of doom. Exactly and directly related to that. It was nice to hear a lot about Lei Shen and his rise to power from a slightly different perspective there. Furthermore, I have to admit that I'm amused that Keeper Ra, that I was right, basically. The Keeper Ra is the High Keeper, basically the uppermost Keeper. There's also some stuff in there that was revealed that's probably new to other people, that wasn't new to me, simply because I already have a fairly large amount of things that I knew from Legion. A lot of those details about Odin, Helya, and the Hall of Valor, and the betrayal, and the nature of the Valkyr, a lot of that actually was already spoiled for me by Legion, because they actually cover that in Legion. So, the whole Titans are planets and Azeroth is a Titan thing, admittedly, we were really, really, really heavily speculating of that before the book actually came out. All that does is just absolutely confirm it. I do find it interesting they do not absolutely confirm if it's Elune is actually the Titan. I still think it is incredibly likely, but they don't actually confirm that. They also don't confirm what exactly the Earth Mother is, if anything. Although, based on what we saw of them thinking Theurgis was the Earth Mother, I'd have to say Therazane probably is the Earth Mother, just based on that. Well, I still think the Taurens were the first druids. I thought that even before I read the book. The Taurens have been around for absolutely forever. The Taurens have been around since before the Night Elves were around. So, again. Yes, Aegwynn built Karazhan. That was another bit of news that we learned. Which actually makes a lot of sense. What else? The fact that the Yongle are the original Tauren. That was actually new. That was something we didn't know about. And so that was kind of interesting. There was a bunch of other little details about exactly how the Mantid started doing their thing and exactly why the old gods functioned. I also really enjoy the idea that the Well of Eternity was actually a wound in the planet. That's new, something we didn't know, and something that actually makes a huge amount of sense. If you have a planet which has this massive world soul within it, and you literally take a huge chunk out of it, this massive font of arcane energy being present there makes perfect sense. This also makes sense when we were showing the map the other day, and we were looking at it. It's like, oh, you know what? That looks about the size of frickin' Texas. And it makes sense now, knowing what we know, because that's basically where Yasharaj was. Which also means Yasharaj was about the size of Texas. It's kind of terrifying, really, Siron. I would also say, based on this is just my own speculation, but based on what we've learned, I would say it is absolutely certain we have now killed the other old gods. Their essence may still have influence, just like Yasharaj did, but I'm pretty sure at this point we did actually kill Cthulhu and we did actually kill Yogg-Saron. A, because they're lower on the totem pole than I thought, and B, because killing them isn't really the overall hard part, especially compared to everything else we've done. It was removing their influence, which we have not done. Cthulhu, after all, was able to empower, well, I should say, the energies of Cthulhu, not Cthulhu directly, because Cthulhu's dead, was actually able to empower Cho'Gall even after his defeat. So I am now actually firmly convinced that we did actually defeat and kill Cthulhu and Yogg-Saron. I'm a little sad we didn't learn a little bit more about N'Zoth, but who knows? Maybe we'll learn more about that in Hearthstone in a bit when they finally show us a picture. That would be amusing, Hylisk. I can't deny that. But that does leave the literary problem of who's the Titan? You know? It is worth noting that we may actually make a... so, the other thing, this is, I think, the most relevant thing. For the longest time, Sargeras has been considered the final boss of Warcraft. That's always been the case. Sometimes people have debated maybe it's the old gods or something else, but no, everyone has constantly been like, no, Sargeras is the biggest bad. That has now been proven wrong. The Void Lords are officially bigger bads than Sargeras. We don't even have names for these creatures, and they can't even manifest physically. So, at this point in time, they have officially upped the scales long term. So we now have something else to go after in the unlikely event that we actually defeat Sargeras anytime soon. That's some long-term planning on their part, I think. And it's the kind of thing I approve of, I might add. Putting something else behind the old gods does kind of make a bit of sense, since you have to put something else behind something else somewhere to escalate that. I hope you're enjoying it, Final Cloud. What do we know about the Void Lords? Virtually nothing. Like, truthfully, we know very little about the Void Lords. Oh, by the way, remember how we kept speculating over and over and over and over and over? Are the old gods unique to Azeroth or not? We can now 100% say they are not. Old gods are just bullets sent out into the physical realm by the Void Lords. So there are thousands, if not millions, of old gods throughout the cosmos. So it is extremely likely now that there were, in fact, old gods on Draenor, both alternate and regular. Which does make sense, and it's something I have suspected this whole time. It's just something they never actually codified until that book. It also makes a few specific quotes make a little more sense. Like Yasharaj's comment about, have fun on this seedling. Seedling, of course, referring to the fact that it will blossom into a titan. That kind of a thing. Yeah, we'll see, Hylisk, we'll see. So the other interesting point of note, and this is probably one of the bigger shock moments in the whole thing, other than the Void Lords, is the fact that the Titans freaking were defeated. Now, I'm not going to say killed, because they weren't, remember that. Their bodies were defeated by Sargeras, but their essences survived and went into their keepers. Now, of the keepers, one of those keepers... Let me double-check my thoughts on that really quick. Two of the keepers have been destroyed. Loken and Tyr. All the other keepers are still there. So we probably still have the rest of the Titan's souls present in those keepers. By the way, this is your very brief warning for a Legion spoiler, going in 3, 2, 1. We know for a fact that the keepers are active in Legion. So that's interesting timing on that. And that's the end of our Legion spoilers for today. Mind Blast, we discussed that. They actually go into extreme detail on why they didn't just destroy Azeroth. In fact, when Sargeras destroyed the planet that was corrupted, the other Titans were like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why did you do that? That's horrible. They condemned Sargeras for his action. So they came here and they instead did what the Titans do best and made all sorts of little servitor races to go do it for them. Ra-Den is currently alive. Yes. In fact, I actually have something that I've had up for some time here. Let's see if I can find it quickly enough. I think this is it.
Wait! I am not your enemy. You are powerful, more powerful than he was even. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps there is still hope. But there is a yawning chasm of darkness beneath you mortals. Vast, endless, and all-consuming. I do not believe that you can correct this doomed course. But you have earned the right to try. Farewell.
That is Ra, or Ra-Den if you prefer. The defeated Keeper, who Leishan actually managed to injure and extract some of his animus and his vita in order to empower his empire. Well, since the original Memoron is effectively placed in the soul, which is in the new Memoron, I would say no. I don't think that's really an issue, Darch. Remember, in this kind of setting, the entity comes with the soul. So that is effectively Memoron, even though he's wearing a different body. That's why I say the Titans are not dead. They're just in different bodies now. Did I finish the entire volume, Django? Yes, I did. We're done with it. My throat hurts like crazy reading all day. Actually, again, this is speculation, but based on what I was reading at the beginning about the nature of Titans, I'm pretty sure all the life on a planet basically becomes like part of a conglomerate sentience, and that is what forms the sentience and sapience of the individual Titan. So, effectively, we would all die if Elune or whatever, the Azeroth Titan woke up. We would just all become a part of it. Him, her. They do have genders, that is confirmed. Well, how will we have warning that he or she or it is finally waking up? I'm also curious what us leaving would do to that sentience, if anything. Like, how do we transit a few million or billion people off the planet, you know? A little more sense make than that, Last Exile. At least I hope so. If not, then we've got an issue. The irony is, based on this, I don't actually have to change all that much in the lore run. There are a few different details I do want to mention in the lore run. But otherwise, for the most part, most of the information I was going to cover for you is unchanged. It's interesting. Everyone in the Dark Portal. Like, right freaking now. Oh, God. Yep, right there. One other interesting thing, they're actually rather consistent with the maps. For example, on the earlier maps, Red Ridge is actually a mountain chain. And then they show a more recent map where it's very much not a mountain chain because, you know, the War of the Three Hammers. But yes, this was absolutely worth the price of admission. Ironically, the only thing I wish is I knew more. I have so many additional questions. You know? It's like, damn it. I want to know more about everything. This picture's just terrifying, though, the more I look at it. The one where Sargeras cleaves a planet in half. That's just a terrifying image. Wow. Yeah, I don't want to think about that. I do have to admit, at this point, they have given us a way finally to defeat a Titan, if you noticed. I'm not sure how we're going to implement it since they already lost to a Titan, but at least we have something to give us something to go against the Titan. Sargeras, I mean, in particular. And then again, it is kind of worth noting that the last time the other Titans all fought just Sargeras, Sargeras won. Which is kind of crazy. If only we had something more chaotic to fight Sargeras with. Something he's not really capable of dealing with. Maybe that might work. You realize also that overall thematically what this means is that we are children of the void. I'm serious. Think about it. For God knows how many eons, everything had been nicely linear and orderly and structured, and then we, were originally ordered, structured, linear, and then the corruption and the curse transformed us into chaotic, fleshy things, and hey, guess what? Now we can actually do stuff. I would also say that my theory about the Titan creatures not really possessing free will is probably true based on what I just read in this book. Because that is really the difference. Free will is best described as chaos. Well, that's a good question, Draculus. I'm not actually sure, to be completely honest. Although if I were to guess, I'd say it's void. Or light, really. Because both of those seem right on the axis to go against it. So, yeah. There's a nice picture of a Naru in here, too. And a Valkyr. A Valkyr, Cenarion, the Naru, some demon dude. I think that's actually Sargeras. A Titan, Cthulhu. It has pictures of the respective aspects of the cosmology. I really am looking forward to Volume 2, I'll tell you that much. So I'm going to go and release this onto YouTube and hope it's not a violation of something to release a book reading on YouTube. If it is, then it'll be taken down and whatever. But I hope you guys have at least enjoyed joining me in this little lore excursion. I need to rest my throat. Especially if I want to stream tomorrow. I'm going to hop off, guys. See you a bit.